My name is Claudia Vasquez. I am 34 years old. Last night I sat in a dimly lit Chicago steakhouse across from my parents, staring at a leather-bound wedding prospectus that demanded $85,000. My mother slid it across the mahogany table, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Since you and Ben chose not to have children, it is only right you fund your sister's big day." My father didn't even look up from his steak. But my husband, the man they had treated like a glorified accountant for years, simply picked up the binder, smiled a slow, deliberate smile, and said a single sentence that froze the blood in my mother's veins. What he uncovered over the next few weeks ended a 10-year cycle of financial abuse and brought my family's fake empire crashing down. Before I tell you how it all unraveled, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Zara Told Stories, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment letting me know your age, where you are watching from, and what time it is there. The ambient noise of the restaurant was a steady hum of clinking silver and low conversations, but at our table, the silence was suffocating. The binder sat between my dinner plate and my half-empty glass of Cabernet. It was heavy, wrapped in cream faux leather with gold lettering. $85,000. The number was printed in a crisp, elegant font on the very first page. My mother, Elena, took a delicate sip of her sparkling water. She adjusted her silk scarf, her gaze expectant and steady. She did not ask a question. She issued a directive masked as a gentle observation. "Isabella is the baby of the family, Claudia," my mother said, her voice smooth and practiced. "Her fiancé comes from a respectable background, and his relatives expect a certain standard. Since you and Ben are unburdened by children and your business is thriving, it is your duty as the older sister to honor our family name." My lungs tightened. The scent of charred ribeye and red wine suddenly made me nauseous. I run a supply chain logistics firm here in Chicago. I negotiate freight contracts with hardened trucking unions. I optimize global routes. I deal in hard, unforgiving facts every single day. If a vendor tries to overcharge my company by a single cent, I catch it, and I cut them off. Yet sitting in that booth, the CEO vanished. I reverted to a terrified 12-year-old girl desperate for a crumb of parental approval. The contrast was staggering. I wore a tailored suit, sitting across from people who still treated me like an obedient bank teller. I stared at the gold lettering on the binder. My mind dragged me back 2 decades to a cramped kitchen table in our old house. I remembered holding a plastic jar of my saved allowance, the heavy thud of coins sliding onto the counter, handing it to my mother so Isabella could join a prestigious ballet academy. My parents had told me then that family requires sacrifice. That was the unwritten rule of my existence. Isabella was the jewel, and I was the vault. She sparkled, and I paid for the polish. My father, Hector, sliced his steak, the serrated edge scraping the porcelain plate in a slow, agonizing rhythm. He did not look up. He did not need to. His silence was the enforcer. He let my mother handle the social engineering while he reaped the benefits of the illusion they built together. The pressure settled on my chest like an anvil. The waitress walked by, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, but the seconds stretched out, tense and heavy. I knew the script. I had lived it for a decade. I opened my mouth, the familiar phrasing of surrender already forming on my tongue. I would say I needed to check my accounts. I would say I could wire the deposit by Monday. It was a reflex, built over years of being managed and manipulated. Before the sound could leave my throat, a warm, calloused hand covered mine under the table. Ben. My husband does not possess the theatrical flair of my relatives. He grew up on a farm downstate, far from the polished pretension of my parents' suburban circles. Working in data science, he operates in a world governed by probability, structured queries, and clean data sets. He thrives in logic. He sees the world in inputs and outputs. Ben reached forward with his free hand and picked up the embossed binder. He did not scoff. He did not raise his voice to draw the attention of the surrounding diners. He did not give my mother the drama she thrived on. Instead, he flipped the binder shut with a quiet, decisive snap. "It is a beautiful presentation, Elena," Ben said. His tone was perfectly even, his smile polite, but entirely impenetrable. "We will need to look at the numbers." My mother's manicured fingers froze halfway to her glass. The practiced warm smile she wore for public spaces vanished, replaced by a brittle, calculating stiffness. Across the booth, my father's knife stopped moving. "You do not need to look at anything, Ben," my mother said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave, the sweetness gone. "This is a family matter. Claudia knows what is expected of her." Ben did not blink. He kept his hand firmly over mine, grounding me, pulling me back from the edge of the emotional cliff my mother had pushed me toward. "Claudia and I share our finances, Elena," he replied. "An $85,000 request requires a full audit of our current commitments. We will take this home, review our ledgers, and give you a factual answer." The air around our table shifted, growing colder than the winter wind blowing off Lake Michigan outside the restaurant windows. A new perimeter had just been drawn. My mother stared at him. She was not used to being told no. She was used to tears, to guilt trips, to dramatic arguments she could win by playing the victim. She had no defense against calm, clinical logic. For the first time in my life, I was not the one reaching for my checkbook to cross the line they drew. My father finally looked up from his plate, his eyes narrowing at Ben, the silent enforcer realizing his intimidation tactics were failing. I looked at my husband, feeling a sudden, sharp clarity pierce through years of cultivated guilt. I did not wire the money that night. And what we found when we opened our own financial records 3 days later was a truth so devastating it would tear my parents' carefully constructed universe apart. The car ride back to our apartment was cloaked in a heavy silence. Ben drove his hands resting steady on the steering wheel of our sedan, navigating the slick, rain-washed streets of downtown Chicago. Passing streetlights cast rhythmic shadows across his profile. I stared out the passenger window at the glowing skyline, my pulse still thrumming against my ribs from the confrontation at the steakhouse. The city outside was a testament to commerce, to hard bargains and unyielding contracts, yet I felt like a hollow shell. My parents had looked at me across that mahogany table, not as a beloved daughter, but as a failing investment. To understand how my family reached a point where an $85,000 wedding demand felt normal, you have to understand the architecture of my existence. I did not inherit a trust fund or a golden Rolodex. I built a supply chain consultancy from a folding table in a cramped studio apartment. My daily life involves mapping freight routes, ensuring tons of Illinois soybeans reach ports in Europe, negotiating with hardened rail yards, and finding efficiency where others see only chaos. I constructed a multi-million-dollar enterprise through sheer, relentless grit. If a shipping vendor tries to overcharge my firm by a single cent, I catch the discrepancy, terminate the contract, and replace them before lunch. I am ruthless in business. But stepping through the front door of my parents' house always stripped away the CEO title. When I landed my first major international contract 6 years ago, I invited my mother and father over for dinner to celebrate the milestone. My mother brought a generic grocery store cake, stayed for 40 minutes, and spent 35 of them talking about Isabella getting promoted to a shift lead at a boutique clothing store. They celebrated my sister for simply breathing. They expected me to move mountains, and when I did, They only asked why I did not move them faster. Isabella was the jewel they polished for display. I was the hidden engine that powered their lifestyle. My logistics brain demands rigorous documentation for everything. Every corporate contract, every invoice, every bill of lading is filed, backed up, and archived in multiple servers. But I never applied that professional rigor to my blood relatives. The turning point, the moment the vault doors truly swung wide open, occurred exactly 5 years ago. I was in the middle of a tense negotiation with a trucking syndicate when my personal phone rang. It was my father, Hector. He sounded breathless, his voice tight with an unfamiliar panic. He claimed the bank was foreclosing on their house. He spun a tale of bad investments, a shifting real estate market, and a looming deadline 30 days away from being locked out onto the street. I remember gripping the edge of my mahogany desk, the cold steel of the corner digging into my palm. He needed $40,000 to catch up on the arrears and stabilize the mortgage. I did not hesitate. I did not ask for a repayment plan or suggest a financial advisor. I wired the funds the very next morning, terrified of seeing my parents homeless. A few days later, Hector sent me an email containing a scanned PDF of a bank default notice. He called it a gesture of transparency. I printed the notice, slipped it into a manila folder, and locked it in the bottom drawer of my office filing cabinet alongside old tax returns. It became a dormant piece of paper, a memory I tried to bury deep because confronting it meant confronting the harsh reality of what my role truly was. The sharp buzz of my phone inside my leather purse pulled me back to the present. The illuminated screen cast a harsh blue glow in the dark interior of the car. It was a text message from Isabella. There was no greeting, no polite inquiry about how dinner went, just a set of cold instructions. I need a credit card number for the deposit. The venue needs $12,000 by Friday or we lose the date. Send the details so I can forward them to the event coordinator. I read the words twice, the glowing text burning my retinas. She did not ask if I was willing to pay. She did not ask if Ben and I had discussed the $85,000 budget our parents ambushed us with. She treated me like an automated corporate sponsor who had fallen behind on a scheduled invoice. The sheer entitlement radiating from the screen was breathtaking. I held the phone in my lap, my thumb hovering over the digital keypad. The familiar, suffocating weight of duty pressed down on my chest. It is a specific kind of gravity, the cultural expectation that the successful child must carry the rest of the bloodline, regardless of the personal cost. A voice in the back of my head, sounding exactly like my mother, whispered that $12,000 was a small price to pay to keep the peace. I could log into my banking app and transfer the funds right now. I could silence my sister, please my parents, and return to the comfortable illusion that I was a valued, respected member of the Vasquez family. Ben glanced over from the driver's seat. The glow of the dashboard illuminated his calm, analytical gaze. He did not tell me what to do. He never forced my hand or issued ultimatums regarding my relatives. He simply asked what the message said. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat and read Isabella's text aloud. The words sounded even more transactional, even more hollow, spoken into the quiet space of the vehicle. Ben nodded slowly, keeping his eyes fixed on the slick road ahead. A $12,000 non-refundable deposit is a significant liability, he noted, his voice carrying the measured cadence he uses when discussing data anomalies. Especially for an event we have not agreed to finance. I rubbed my temples, a dull ache beginning to form behind my eyes. She expects it, Ben. My parents promised it to her. If I do not send this card number by Friday, my mother will orchestrate a crisis. She will call every aunt and cousin we have. She will frame me as a villain ruining Isabella's life over a sum of money I can easily afford. Ben guided the car into our parking garage, the tires squeaking faintly against the smooth concrete. He put the vehicle in park, turned off the engine, and unbuckled his seatbelt. He turned to face me in the dim light. "Claudia," he said softly, holding my gaze. "You have spent your entire adult life optimizing systems, cutting out waste, and demanding transparency from every vendor you work with. Why do you let your family operate in the dark?" "Because they are my family," I whispered the defense, sounding incredibly weak even to my own ears. He reached across the center console and rested his hand over mine, replicating his gesture from the steakhouse. Being blood does not grant someone a free pass to treat you like an endless line of credit. You are terrified of the social fallout if you say no. I understand that fear. But what is the long-term cost of continually saying yes? I looked down at my phone. The screen had gone dark. The urge to type in my Visa number was still there, a phantom reflex twitching in my fingers. But beneath the layers of guilt, a new sensation was beginning to take root. A cold, quiet realization. My sister was likely sleeping soundly across town, confident that her older sister would simply produce the cash on demand. My parents were likely drinking expensive wine, annoyed by Ben's interference, but secure in the knowledge that they could break my resolve by morning. They relied on my shame to keep me compliant. I slid the phone back into my purse without typing a single letter. Ben opened his car door. "Let us go upstairs," he said. "I want to pull the transaction histories from our joint accounts and your personal savings. Every transfer, every check, every wire we have sent them over the past decade. If they want us to fund this wedding, we are going to look at the historical data first." I followed him toward the elevator, the echo of our footsteps ringing in the cavernous concrete structure. I felt a tight knot of dread forming in my stomach. I had never actually looked at the cumulative total of my financial support. I had always treated each crisis as an isolated incident. The broken water heater, the car repairs, the supposed foreclosure. Treating them as separate events made it easier to justify the bleeding. As the elevator doors slid shut, separating us from the damp garage air, I knew the blindfold was coming off. I just did not realize how deep the deception went, or that the first explosive piece of the puzzle would be handed to me the very next day by the man Isabella was planning to marry. The next morning, the Chicago skyline was shrouded in a thick gray fog rolling in off the lake, matching the heavy fog settling over my mind. I had a 9 a.m. meeting with a major rail freight client, but I routed my walk past a specific artisanal coffee shop near the loop. It was Isabella's favorite spot, the kind of place that charged $8 for a latte and specialized in aesthetic foam art. I was not there for the coffee. I was there because I knew Isabella had an early Pilates class down the street, and she invariably sent her fiancé to pick up her order afterward. I needed to see Cameron. I needed to understand the mechanics of the illusion my sister was constructing. Cameron Foster was standing near the pickup counter when I walked in, checking his smartwatch. He was a high school math teacher from a working-class suburb on the south side, grounded, practical, and possessing an earnest Midwestern charm that my parents quietly patronized. They smiled at him at family dinners, but behind his back, my mother often lamented that Isabella was marrying beneath her potential. Yet Cameron adored my sister. He looked at her the way a man looks at a rare, delicate bird he cannot believe landed in his hands. "Claudia," he said, his face breaking into a genuine warm smile as he spotted me. He stepped out of the pickup line to offer a quick hug. "I didn't expect to see you here. Isabella usually makes me run this errand solo." I smiled back, the expression feeling tight and unnatural on my face. "Just grabbing a quick caffeine fix before heading to the office. How are the wedding preparations coming along?" Cameron chuckled, a sound full of easy affection. "They are intense. I'm a math teacher, so the number side of this event is giving me mild anxiety. But Isabella has a vision, and I know how much this day means to your parents. He gestured for me to step forward in the line with him. The barista called out a complicated oat milk order, and Cameron stepped up to grab the tray. As he handed the barista a $5 tip, he turned back to me, his expression shifting to something deeply sincere, almost reverent. "Listen, Claudia," he said, keeping his voice low so the surrounding commuters would not overhear. "I actually wanted to pull you aside at the steakhouse last night, but the moment never felt right. I just want to say thank you for everything. I know Isabella can be demanding, but I truly appreciate what you are doing for her." I tilted my head, my logistical instincts immediately flaring. I had not agreed to do anything yet. The $85,000 budget was still a live grenade sitting between Ben and my parents. "What exactly are you referring to, Cameron?" He laughed a self-deprecating sound and shifted the cardboard drink carrier in his hands. "The business," he said smoothly, completely oblivious to the fact that he was dropping a bomb in the middle of a crowded cafe. "Being the silent partner for Isabella's boutique consulting firm. I know she likes to project this image of being a self-made entrepreneur, but she told me how you provided the seed money and continue to float the operational costs while she builds her client list. It takes a lot of pressure off me on a teacher's salary. I just want you to know I do not take your generosity for granted." The ambient noise of the coffee shop, the grinding espresso beans, the chatter of businessmen, the hiss of the steam wand vanished. I felt the air leave my lungs. Isabella did not have a boutique consulting firm. Isabella had a laptop she used to shop online and a vague title she had invented for her Instagram bio. She did not have clients. She had a mountain of credit card debt and an older sister who occasionally paid it off when our mother called me in tears. The lie was not just a slight exaggeration. It was a structural fabrication designed to explain her luxury lifestyle to a man who knew the value of $1. She had explicitly told her future husband that I was happily funding a fake business. I looked at Cameron's earnest, trusting face. The urge to scream the truth at him to shatter the illusion right there next to the pastry display was nearly overwhelming. I wanted to tell him he was marrying a fraud. I wanted to shake him and explain that the woman he adored was treating him like an unwitting prop in a play directed by our parents. But in my line of work, you do not detonate a bomb until you understand the blast radius. If a shipping vendor is running a scam, you do not call them out immediately. You audit the books, track the missing inventory, build an airtight case, and then you bring down the hammer. If I exploded now, Isabella would cry, my mother would intervene, and Cameron would be caught in a messy, emotional crossfire where the truth could easily be obscured by family drama. I needed data. I forced my facial muscles into a neutral, pleasant configuration. I nodded slowly, sipping my plain black coffee. "It is important to support family," I said the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "Isabella has expensive taste, certainly." Cameron chuckled again, shaking his head. "You are telling me. I almost had a heart attack when she showed me the quote for the floral arrangements yesterday. $15,000 for imported peonies in October. It is madness." My grip tightened on the cardboard sleeve of my cup. $15,000. I kept my voice perfectly casual. "That is quite a floral budget. Did you guys already sign the contract with the florist?" "Oh, no," Cameron replied, taking a sip of his own drink. "Isabella said you told her not to worry about the flowers. She said you considered it a separate gift outside of the main venue budget. So thank you again, seriously. You are making her dream wedding possible." The scope of the deception expanded vast and horrifying. She was not just demanding an $85,000 lump sum from Ben and me. She was actively committing us to separate luxury vendors behind our backs, using my name as collateral to sign contracts she could not afford. My sister was treating me like an endless, unquestioning line of credit, and my parents were clearly facilitating the lie. I was not a sister. I was not even a corporate sponsor. I was a host organism, and they were the parasites draining my resources to fuel an illusion. I managed to excuse myself from the coffee shop a few minutes later, leaving Cameron to walk back to Isabella's apartment with his 2 overpriced lattes. The cold morning air hit my face as I stepped onto the pavement, but I did not feel the chill. I felt a slow, radiating heat spreading through my chest. It was not the frantic panic of a 12-year-old girl desperate for approval anymore. It was the cold, focused anger of a CEO who had just discovered massive internal theft. I walked the 4 blocks to my office building, my mind moving faster than the Chicago traffic. I needed every contract. I needed every invoice. I needed to see exactly how many lies Isabella had spun, using my financial stability as her safety net. I badged into my high-rise building, the familiar scent of polished granite and expensive coffee grounding me. By the time the elevator doors pinged open on the logistics floor, I had a plan. I was not going to fund their theater anymore. I was going to dismantle the stage. I walked into my corner office and closed the heavy glass door. Before I could even sit down, my cell phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Ben. I answered it, staring out at the gray expanse of Lake Michigan through my floor-to-ceiling windows. The fog was finally beginning to lift. "I got it," Ben said. His voice lacked its usual morning warmth. It was clipped, precise, and entirely professional. "Got what I asked?" Dropping my briefcase onto my desk. "Everything," he replied. I spent the last 3 hours pulling the archives. I bypassed the standard banking app limits and requested the full historical ledgers directly from our branch manager. I have every wire transfer, every check, every emergency bailout, and every direct payment we have made to your parents or Isabella over the past 10 years. I closed my eyes, pressing my forehead against the cool glass of the window. The coffee shop conversation with Cameron replayed in my mind. The fake consulting firm, the $15,000 peonies, the absolute, unshakable confidence that I would simply absorb the cost. "How bad is it?" I asked softly. Ben did not answer immediately. I heard the faint clicking of his mouse over the phone line. When he finally spoke, the clinical detachment in his voice was terrifying. "Claudia," he said, "you need to come home tonight and look at this spreadsheet. We are not dealing with an $85,000 wedding demand. We are dealing with a decade of systemic financial fraud. And the foreclosure money you sent your father 5 years ago, I found out exactly where it went." The line went silent. I stared at the sprawling city below me, a sudden icy resolve hardening in my veins. The ambush at the steakhouse had initiated a war they assumed they would win by default. They thought I would remain silent to protect the family image. But they had underestimated the fatal flaw in their own design. They had pushed the logistics expert into auditing her own life, and the audit was about to reveal a twist so dark it would shatter the Vasquez illusion forever. Our downtown apartment felt like a fortress suspended above the city. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed a grid of glowing amber streetlights, shutting out the biting wind whipping off the lake. Usually, walking through our front door brought a sense of relief, a shedding of the corporate armor I wore all day. Tonight, the air inside felt charged, thick with the anticipation of a coming storm. Ben walked straight to his home office. He did not bother turning on the overhead lights. He simply sat at his custom-built desk, waking his triple-monitor setup. The sudden burst of cold blue light illuminated his focused expression. I stood in the doorway, watching him pull up the encrypted files he had secured from our bank manager. Before we could truly understand the depth of the deception, I needed the other half of the equation. I had our outgoing wire histories, but I did not have the exact liabilities my sister had signed in my name. I needed the vendor contracts for the wedding. If I demanded them out of anger, Isabella would immediately play the victim cry to our mother and lock down her accounts. I had to outmaneuver her, using the one trait she could never suppress, which was her greed. I pulled my phone from my pocket and composed a message designed to stroke her ego and bypass her defenses. It was a tactic I used when negotiating with stubborn freight suppliers, making them feel like they were winning while I secured the terms I needed. Isabella, I typed, keeping my thumb steady. I need you to forward the executed contracts for the florist, the venue, and any other major vendors you have secured. My accountant requires the official routing numbers and tax identification details to set up the direct wire transfers and bypass my daily banking limits. Make sure the documents show your signature so he knows they are finalized. I hit send. It was a perfect trap disguised as a white flag. I walked into the kitchen to pour 2 glasses of ice water. My heart beat a slow, measured rhythm against my ribs. 3 minutes later, my phone chimed. Isabella did not question the request. She did not express gratitude for the supposed financial bailout. She simply sent a massive zip file containing every signed agreement. A few seconds after that, a notification popped up from her social media account. She had posted a fresh story. It was a boomerang video of her clinking champagne glasses with Cameron at a high-end rooftop bar. The caption overlaid on the video read, "When your big sister finally stops stressing and secures the bag for your dream wedding. Blessed." I stared at the screen, the icy condensation from the water glass dripping onto my knuckles. A year ago, that post would have sent me into a spiral of resentment and familial obligation. I would have felt manipulated, but duty-bound to maintain the facade of the generous older sibling. Now, sitting on one of our leather bar stools, I felt nothing but a glacial, razor-sharp clarity. She was bragging to her thousands of followers about a victory that was actually her confession. She had just handed me the documented proof of her financial overreach. I forwarded the zip file to Ben and walked back into his office. He had already organized a decade of our joint and individual transaction histories into a sprawling digital ledger. The spreadsheet stretched across 2 of his wide monitors, a dizzying array of dates, amounts, and recipient routing numbers. Ben operates with the surgical precision of a scientist isolating a virus. He did not offer emotional commentary. He let the data speak. He ran a series of Python scripts to categorize the outflows matching my transfers against the routing numbers belonging to my parents and my sibling. The numbers began to populate the summary column. At first, it was a cascade of minor bleedouts. $500 in 2016 for a supposed car repair, $1,200 the following spring to cover a gap in my father's failed real estate investment, $3,000 to settle a dental emergency my mother claimed her insurance refused to cover. Watching the rows multiply was like watching a time-lapse of my own subjugation. I had treated each incident as an isolated crisis, believing I was the dutiful daughter keeping the ship afloat during hard times. Seeing them stacked chronologically revealed the stark truth. It was not a series of unfortunate events. It was a highly organized subscription service to my bank account. The crises always seemed to happen right after I closed a major logistics contract or received a quarterly bonus. They were tracking my success and taxing it. Ben opened the zip file I had just forwarded. He extracted the vendor agreements Isabella had signed and dragged the newly acquired liabilities onto his third monitor. The florist contract Cameron had mentioned was there, securing $15,000 worth of imported blooms. But there was also a catering agreement demanding $22,000, a transportation booking for vintage cars, and a custom lighting designer. Isabella had signed her name on the dotted lines, but she had listed my corporate office address for the billing department. She had legally bound herself to the debts, but engineered the paperwork so the collection notices would land on my desk. I stood behind Ben, resting my hands on his shoulders. I felt the tension in his muscles, the quiet anger radiating from him as he processed the sheer volume of the entitlement. I watched the cursor move across the glowing screens. The loyalty I had harbored for my blood relatives died a quiet death in that room. It evaporated, leaving behind a profound emptiness that was rapidly filling with tactical resolve. I was looking at a decade of emotional manipulation quantified in black and white. Every time my mother had cried on the phone, every time my father had spoken about the heavy burden of providing, they were simply generating invoices for me to pay. The total sum of the historical transfers alone was staggering, far exceeding the initial $85,000 wedding demand. It was money Ben and I could have used for a down payment on a larger home, for investments for our own future. Instead, it had vanished into the endless void of my family's fabricated lifestyle. But Ben did not look satisfied. The summary row at the bottom of the spreadsheet was glowing a warning red, yet he kept his eyes fixed on the middle of the screen. He put his glasses back on and highlighted a specific cluster of transactions from 5 years ago. The $40,000 wire I had sent to save my parents' house from foreclosure sat isolated against the dark mode background of his software. "Claudia," he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. "The total sum is sickening, but that is not the worst part." I leaned forward, my breath catching in my throat. I looked at the $40,000 line item. I remembered the sheer terror I felt the day my father called me, begging for the funds to keep a roof over their heads. I remembered wiring the money within hours. "I just ran a cross-reference on the destination routing number for your father's foreclosure bailout." Ben continued, his fingers flying across the keyboard to pull up a secondary database. "I compared it to public property records and matching timestamps on your sister's accounts. We need to look at exactly where this money actually went. Because according to the data, it never reached a mortgage lender." The glow from Ben's monitors cast long, sharp shadows across the walls of his home office. I stood behind his chair, my hands gripping the backrest so hard my knuckles ached. The digital rows of our financial history blurred for a fraction of a second before my logistics training forced my vision back into focus. I needed to see the data. I needed to understand the exact anatomy of the lie. Ben pulled up a separate browser window navigating to the Cook County Public Property Records portal. He typed in the address of my childhood home, the sprawling colonial in the suburbs that my parents treated as the ultimate symbol of their success. The screen populated with legal filings, deeds, and lien histories. He pointed to a specific document registered exactly 14 days before my father had called me in a panic about an impending foreclosure. It was a home equity line of credit. My father had not defaulted on his mortgage. He had walked into a bank, leveraged the equity in the colonial, and secured a substantial credit line. He possessed the funds to cover any financial shortfall. Yet 2 weeks later, he dialed my number, injected sheer terror into his voice, and begged his eldest daughter for $40,000 to keep a roof over our heads. I watched the cursor move from the county records back to our banking spreadsheet. The chronological timeline was indisputable. The day after my wire transfer hit my father's checking account, the money fractured into 2 distinct outbound payments. $25,000 went directly to an upscale residential contractor based in the North Shore. I closed my eyes, a bitter taste rising in the back of my throat. I remembered that autumn vividly. My mother had unveiled a breathtaking kitchen renovation. She had paraded her friends through the house, showing off imported marble countertops, custom mahogany cabinetry, and a professional-grade stove. When I asked how they managed such an upgrade right after a financial crisis, she smoothly lied. She claimed an old water pipe had burst, and a generous insurance payout covered the remodel. She stood in a kitchen paid for by my panic and served me coffee without a single flinch of guilt. The remaining $15,000 from that wire followed a different path. Ben highlighted the transfer. It moved from my father's account straight into Isabella's personal checking. Less than a week later, my sister announced she was taking a gap year to find herself in Paris. She posted daily photos of croissants near the Eiffel Tower, designer shopping bags on cobblestone streets, and expensive wine on wrought iron balconies. She framed it as a journey of self-discovery, funded by her fierce independence. In reality, she was sipping champagne financed by the emergency bailout I provided to stop her from becoming homeless. They had conspired. This was not a moment of weakness from a desperate father. This was a coordinated extraction. My parents secured their luxury kitchen, my sister secured her European vacation, and they used my ingrained sense of duty to foot the bill. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the computer tower. I thought the foreclosure deception was the bottom of the abyss, but Ben was still typing. His brow furrowed, his eyes scanning a different section of the ledger. He isolated a credit card account. It was a card I had opened for Isabella years ago, intended strictly for medical emergencies or vehicle breakdowns. Over the years, the definition of an emergency had stretched, but I generally paid the balance each month to protect my own credit score, which was tied to the account. 6 months ago, Ben said, his voice dropping to a surgical whisper, "You paid off a $15,000 balance on this card." Isabella categorized the expense on her end as an upfront retainer for a business branding consultant. Do you remember that? I nodded slowly. She told me she needed a sleek website and a marketing strategy to launch her boutique firm. She promised it was the final push she needed to become entirely self-sufficient. I authorized the payment, believing I was investing in her independence. Ben shook his head. He pulled up the merchant's identification code attached to that specific transaction. He bypassed the vague description Isabella had provided and traced the digital footprint directly to the source. The vendor was not a web developer. It was a bespoke jeweler located on Oak Street, an exclusive boutique known for custom diamond settings. Look at the timeline Claudia Ben instructed, tapping the screen. The transaction processed on April 2nd. Cameron proposed to Isabella on April 24th. The air vanished from my lungs. The logistical puzzle pieces snapped together with a sickening clarity. Cameron was a high school math teacher. He drove a 10-year-old sedan and meticulously budgeted his salary. Yet, when he proposed, he presented Isabella with a flawless, custom-cut diamond that defied every rule of his financial reality. I remembered being surprised by the ring, wondering how he had managed such an extravagant purchase. He had not managed it. Isabella had bought her own engagement ring. She walked into a luxury jeweler, selected a $15,000 diamond, charged it to the emergency card tied to my name, and then handed the ring to Cameron. She orchestrated her own fairy tale proposal, trapping a good, grounded man in a lie, and manipulated me into paying for the trap. She needed the status symbol of a massive diamond to parade in front of her friends, and she did not care who she had to exploit to get it. I stared at the glowing monitor, the betrayal sinking into my bones. She had not just stolen money. She had stolen Cameron's dignity. She had manufactured a pivotal life moment using stolen funds, building her future marriage on a foundation of profound deceit. "Run the final macro," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. It was devoid of emotion, stripped of all sisterly affection or daughterly devotion. "Calculate the total." Ben hit the final command. The software tallied every fraudulent loan, every diverted wire, every luxury expense disguised as a crisis over the last 10 years. The number flashed at the bottom of the screen in stark, undeniable red text. $500. The number echoed in the quiet room. It was not just currency. It was a metric of my stolen life. It represented missed vacations Ben and I had skipped to conserve cash. It represented late nights staring at logistics manifests, grinding through exhaustion to hit revenue targets so I could support a family that was secretly laughing at my gullibility. It was $250,000 funneled into a black hole of narcissism and entitlement. "Print it," I instructed. Ben sent the command. Across the room, the laser printer whirred to life, the mechanical sound cutting through the heavy silence. I walked over and watched the crisp white pages slide into the output tray. Each sheet was a documented testament to their exploitation. I gathered the warm paper, feeling the physical weight of the truth in my hands. The abstract betrayal was now tangible. It was data. It was evidence. I carried the stack of papers down the hall to my own home office. My workspace is a reflection of my career, organized, minimalist, and unforgiving. I opened the bottom drawer of my mahogany desk and pulled out a sleek, black, calfskin leather portfolio. It was an expensive corporate binder I normally used for presenting high-level supply chain bids to Fortune 500 executives. The leather was smooth, the stitching impeccable. The interior lined with pristine protective sleeves. I carefully slid the printed spreadsheet into the clear sleeves. I placed the evidence of the fake foreclosure in the front, followed by the itemized Parisian gap year, and ending with the merchant receipts for the $15,000 engagement ring. I closed the portfolio. To the outside world, it looks like a high-end wedding planner. It looked exactly like the kind of luxurious embossed binder a wealthy older sister would carry to organize her siblings' extravagant event. But inside, it was a ledger of abuse. It was a forensic weapon designed to dismantle an empire of lies. Ben stood in the doorway, watching me smooth my hand over the black leather cover. "What is the operational strategy?" he asked. "Do we call Hector? Do we summon them here for a private meeting?" I looked up at my husband, the logistics CEO fully taking the wheel. "If we confront them in private, they will spin it. My mother will cry, my father will deny the timeline, and Isabella will claim I am trying to sabotage her happiness. They survive by controlling the narrative behind closed doors. They rely on the fact that I will keep their secrets to preserve the family image." I picked up the leather folder, feeling its solid, reassuring weight. "We are not having a private conversation," I said. "Isabella's engagement party is this Saturday on the West Loop rooftop. My parents have invited 50 people. Cameron's entire family will be there, along with every wealthy business associate my father wants to impress. They want me to hand over an $85,000 wedding deposit in front of an audience to prove our family prestige." I walked toward the door, my grip tightening on the binder. I am going to give them exactly what they asked for. I am going to bring the numbers to the party. But as I placed the folder by the front door, my phone buzzed on the console table. Elena's name flashed on the screen, signaling the start of a ruthless social pressure campaign. My mother realized I had not wired the money yet, and she was preparing to weaponize our entire extended family to force my hand before the weekend arrived. The trap was set, but she had no idea she was the one stepping into it. The fluorescent light in Ben's office buzzed softly against the stark silence of the room. Claudia sat frozen across from his heavy oak desk, staring at the scattered stacks of bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and printed emails. Ben rubbed his temples, his usually calm demeanor replaced by a rigid posture of absolute disbelief. He had spent 15 years as a prominent forensic accountant, unraveling complex corporate frauds and tracing hidden assets for high-net-worth clients during bitter divorces. His extensive background trained him to spot inconsistencies that ordinary people would glance right over. Yet he had never seen a financial massacre quite so intimately domestic. He slid a crisp white document across the polished wood, pointing to a highlighted row of numbers. The tension in the air felt thick enough to suffocate them both. Claudia took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the paper to begin the audit. The first devastating truth materialized in the form of a county property record. Ben explained in a quiet, measured voice that Hector had never been on the brink of losing the family home to foreclosure. Instead, exactly 1 month before Hector tearfully begged Claudia for salvation in their living room, he had quietly taken out a massive home equity line of credit against the property. Hector always prided himself on being a fierce patriarch, a man who constantly lectured his children about the virtues of financial independence and the absolute evils of borrowing. His entire public persona rested entirely on the illusion of the strong, self-reliant immigrant who built his kingdom with his bare hands. Seeing his signature on a bank loan document leveraging the very roof over their heads to extract a mountain of cash shattered that lifelong illusion instantly. The entire foreclosure threat was an absolute fabrication. Hector manufactured the terrifying crisis to manipulate Claudia into liquidating her own hard-earned savings. The betrayal struck her physical form like a violent blow to the chest. A new, burning conflict immediately erupted within her racing mind. If the bank was never actually threatening to take the house, where exactly did her massive cash infusion go? Ben anticipated her silent question and gently pushed a second stack of heavily annotated financial statements forward across the desk. The $40,000 Claudia surrendered to save her parents from supposed ruin never touched a mortgage account or a delinquent tax bill. Within 48 hours of her wire transfer clearing the bank, the funds were splintered into 3 distinct, highly specific directions. Claudia traced the printed dates with her shaking index finger, her blood running completely cold as she matched the withdrawals to specific celebrated family events. $15,000 went directly to a highly exclusive boutique architectural firm downtown. This payment perfectly coincided with Elena unveiling her spectacular luxury kitchen remodel to the neighborhood. Elena always obsessed over superficial appearances, hosting lavish dinner parties to impress her wealthy socialite friends, while secretly agonizing over their silent judgments. She had shamelessly used her oldest daughter's emergency funds to install imported Italian marble countertops, custom cabinetry, and commercial-grade appliances. The sickness in Claudia's stomach twisted tighter, turning into a profound nausea. Before she could process the betrayal of the kitchen, the next document revealed another horrific truth. The next $15,000 was wired directly to an international student housing agency based in Europe. Isabella, the undeniable golden child of the family, had suddenly announced a spontaneous, soul-searching gap year in Paris, right after the kitchen remodel was finished. Isabella always managed to escape any real responsibility floating through life on a cloud of unearned privilege, while relying heavily on her striking looks and charismatic charm to secure endless favors from those around her. Claudia vividly remembered listening to Isabella brag endlessly on video calls about finding her true artistic self in the vibrant cafes of Montmartre. Isabella had been completely unaware, or perhaps willfully ignorant, that her sister's nightly terror and massive financial sacrifice entirely funded those decadent Parisian afternoons. The audacity of eating expensive pastries bought with stolen security funds sent a wave of pure anger radiating through Claudia's veins. The sheer scale of the theft left Claudia temporarily breathless, but the true depth of the depravity still waited patiently at the bottom of the evidentiary pile. Ben leaned forward, his voice dropping to a deeply somber whisper as he revealed the final, most twisted piece of the financial puzzle. He pointed to a singular, precise wire transfer of $15,000 directed to a highly exclusive, appointment-only diamond merchant located in New York City. The date stamped on this specific transfer aligned flawlessly with a major, widely celebrated family milestone. It was the exact week Cameron finally proposed to Isabella. Cameron came from a prominent, heavily established, wealthy family, and Isabella had spent 3 agonizing years desperately trying to secure his permanent commitment. The intense pressure she felt to marry into his elevated social stratum consumed her entirely, dictating her every waking move. The truth hit Claudia with the devastating force of a runaway freight train. Isabella did not patiently wait for Cameron to save up for an engagement ring. Isabella took the final portion of Claudia's stolen money to secretly purchase her own brilliant cut, flawless diamond. She essentially handed the wildly expensive ring to Cameron behind closed doors, completely orchestrating the entire romantic proposal to force his hand and secure her coveted spot in his wealthy family. Isabella bought her own engagement ring with her sister's money, just to trap a rich husband into marriage. The sheer manipulation involved in orchestrating that fake fairy tale romance disgusted Claudia beyond the capacity of spoken words. The digital calculator sitting on Ben's desk displayed the final grand total in glowing green digits. $214,500. That was the exact calculated price tag her family placed on her sanity, her financial future, and her unconditional trust. Every single tear they shed in front of her, every desperate midnight phone call, every emotional guilt trip about family loyalty was a highly calculated performance designed solely to extract wealth. They bled her dry to fund their vanity, their luxurious vacations, and their fraudulent social climbing ambitions. Claudia stood up slowly, moving with a strange, terrifyingly cold calmness that she had never felt before in her entire life. She did not shed a single tear. The well of sorrow had completely dried up, replaced instantly by a cold, calculating fury. She quietly asked Ben to print every single spreadsheet, every wire receipt, every forged email, and every matching social media post documenting their luxurious stolen purchases. She gathered the thick mountain of damning evidence, thanked Ben for his discretion, and walked directly across the busy street to an upscale, quiet stationery boutique. Claudia browsed the silent aisles until she found exactly what she needed. She purchased a sleek, heavy black leather binding folder. It felt incredibly substantial in her hands, smelling strongly of expensive craftsmanship and serious corporate authority. She spent the next 2 hours sitting alone at a quiet corner table in a local coffee shop, meticulously punching holes in the printed documents and organizing the pages into strict chronological order inside the dark, heavy cover. The black folder slowly became a profound physical symbol of her internal transformation. To the outside world, or to anyone casually glancing at her carrying it down the street, it looked exactly like a premium luxury wedding planner portfolio. It appeared to be the innocent tool of an excited, devoted sister, eagerly helping organize a high society marriage. But to Claudia, it was a precise, indisputable ledger of profound abuse. It was the absolute, undeniable proof of their generational theft and pathological manipulation. She ran her hand slowly over the smooth leather cover, cementing her final, unshakable decision. Her family heavily relied on deep secrecy, intense shame, and private emotional blackmail to control her every move. They thrived entirely in the dark shadows of closed doors and hushed living room conversations, where they could easily twist the narrative, cry on command, and play the ultimate victims. Claudia realized with absolute clarity that confronting them in the privacy of their home would only result in more gaslighting, more hysterical tears, and more aggressive denials. They would try to rewrite history on the spot, just as they always did whenever challenged. Therefore, she decided right then and there that they would absolutely not have this conversation in private. The upcoming highly anticipated bridal shower was scheduled for the following Saturday afternoon at an incredibly exclusive country club. The event would be packed with Cameron's wealthy relatives, Elena's judgment-obsessed social circle, and every single person Isabella desperately wanted to impress. It was the absolute perfect stage for a reckoning. Claudia tucked the heavy black ledger securely under her arm, stepping out into the bright afternoon sun, completely ready to burn their fake empire of lies to the absolute ground. The ticking clock of the fabricated venue deadline echoed loudly in Claudia's mind, a constant, oppressive rhythm that threatened to consume her sanity completely. Morning sunlight filtered through her apartment windows, but the brightness offered absolutely no warmth. Her cellular phone resting on the kitchen island suddenly vibrated violently against the granite surface. Then it vibrated again, and again. The relentless buzzing resembled an angry hive of bees, signaling the beginning of a meticulously orchestrated public relations campaign. Elena had officially activated the network. She possessed a terrifying talent for transforming private domestic disputes into highly publicized community events, and this situation was no different. Claudia stared down at the glowing screen, watching a seemingly endless stream of notifications cascading downward. The incoming text messages were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Aunt Rosa, calling all the way from Peoria, sent a glowing paragraph overflowing with excessive praise. She called Claudia an absolute angel, expressing profound gratitude that the older sister was stepping up to provide such a magical wedding day for her sibling. Barely a minute later, Cousin David chimed in from Evanston, posting a lengthy message about how inspiring it was to see such fiercely loyal devotion within their bloodline. He remarked that Isabella was incredibly lucky to have a sibling willing to sacrifice everything for her happiness. These relatives were completely oblivious to the staggering reality of the situation. They were innocent pawns, eagerly marching forward on a chessboard designed by a mastermind. Elena had preemptively contacted every single influential member of their extended lineage, painting a glorious fictional portrait of Claudia, enthusiastically funding the grand celebration. This particular strategy highlighted a dark fundamental truth about Elena's character. Growing up in a fiercely competitive neighborhood, the matriarch learned very early that reputation operated as the ultimate currency. She discovered that controlling the community narrative granted absolute power over individuals. If you could dictate what the neighbors believed, you could force anyone to behave exactly how you wanted. Elena wielded gossip like a precision weapon, understanding that people would rather endure immense personal suffering than face public shame. By preemptively crowning her eldest daughter as the generous savior of the upcoming nuptials, she constructed an invisible, suffocating prison made entirely of towering expectations. The sheer brilliance of the trap paralyzed Claudia temporarily. The request for massive amounts of capital had aggressively evolved past a simple living room guilt trip. It was now a high-stakes hostage negotiation playing out before a massive audience. If she dared to refuse the cash transfer now, she would not merely be rejecting her mother and sister in private. She would instantly transform into a monstrous villain in the eyes of dozens of aunts, uncles, and cousins who currently worshipped her supposed generosity. The collective disappointment of her entire heritage rested heavily squarely on her shoulders. Revealing the truth meant exposing her parents as greedy frauds, a revelation that would shatter the fragile ecosystem of their entire community. The burden of holding that explosive secret felt physically agonizing. Suddenly, a different, significantly sharper chime pierced the tense silence of the kitchen. A social media application notification flashed brightly across the glass display. Isabella had just tagged her in a brand new, highly visible digital story. Claudia reluctantly swiped her finger across the glass, opening the program to confront the latest digital assault. A perfectly filtered, stunningly saturated photograph appeared. Isabella stood triumphantly outside the majestic, towering, wrought-iron gates of the exclusive country estate she falsely claimed required an immediate booking fee. She wore a perfectly tailored designer outfit, flashing a brilliant, triumphant smile toward the camera lens. The caption underneath the image read, "Counting down the hours until we secure my absolute dream location, all made entirely possible by my remarkably generous sister." In the bottom corner of the image, a literal animated countdown clock ticked away the seconds, creating an agonizing sense of artificial urgency. Isabella possessed a unique brand of modern ruthlessness. She had spent the last decade meticulously cultivating an online identity that vastly overshadowed her actual, unremarkable existence. Every single waking moment was carefully curated, aggressively edited, and immediately broadcast to extract maximum envy from her massive following. Her entire sense of self-worth was permanently tethered to engagement metrics, likes, and validating comments from strangers. She understood the terrifying power of digital peer pressure natively. By publicly linking Claudia to the impending deadline, she essentially dared her older sibling to ruin the fantasy in front of thousands of watchful digital eyes. It was a digital extortion attempt, disguised beautifully as sisterly affection. The combined weight of the incoming messages and the ticking online clock created a deafening pitch inside the quiet apartment. Claudia felt a deeply ingrained, deeply familiar physiological response rising rapidly in her chest. Her throat tightened restrictively, making each breath incredibly shallow and labored. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird desperately seeking an exit. For nearly 3 decades, her singular survival mechanism in this chaotic dynamic was unconditional compliance. The simplest, most effective way to extinguish the raging fire of anxiety was to simply surrender whatever they demanded. Her leather checkbook sat innocuously near the coffee maker, whispering a highly seductive promise of immediate, undeniable peace. Writing down those specific numbers, signing her name on the dotted line, would instantly stop the harassment. The buzzing would cease. The smiling photographs would remain undisturbed. The fragile, toxic peace would be successfully maintained for just a little while longer. She reached her shaking hand toward the pristine paper checks, her fingers brushing the smooth surface. The urge to cave in was incredibly powerful, fueled by a lifetime of emotional conditioning. But then her gaze drifted slowly across the room, landing squarely on the dining table. Resting ominously on the polished wood was the heavy, dark binding she had purchased just hours before. The physical presence of that object anchored her frantic spinning thoughts instantly. Inside that sleek cover lay the cold, undisputed mathematics of their lifelong exploitation. The fraudulent mortgage crisis, the secret luxury renovations, the decadent European vacations, the self-purchased diamond engagement ring, the sheer, terrifying audacity of their limitless greed rapidly burned away the lingering fog of her panic. She was no longer the frightened child desperate for a mother's approval, nor was she the compliant sibling willing to sacrifice her own future to maintain a facade. The ledger proved that her sacrifices were never appreciated. They were simply expected, consumed, and instantly forgotten. Giving them another massive sum of money would not buy her any genuine love. It would only validate their horrific behavior and guarantee their eventual return for more. The fear of public judgment that Elena relied upon suddenly vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. The trap they set was indeed brilliant, but it fundamentally relied on Claudia remaining silent and deeply ashamed. They had vastly underestimated the absolute freedom that comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose. Claudia slowly pulled her hand away from the checkbook. She picked up her cellular device, deliberately bypassing the flashy social media applications entirely. Instead, she opened a direct private communication thread connected exclusively to her parents and sister. She stared at the flashing cursor, her mind operating with lethal, unprecedented clarity. She typed her response slowly, choosing every single syllable with meticulous precision to ensure absolutely zero misinterpretation. She did not confirm the exact dollar amount requested. She intentionally avoided mentioning any specific bank transfer or wiring instructions. She simply typed a polite, brief sentence stating that she completely understood the gravity of the impending deadline and promised she would personally deliver her final financial commitment directly to the highly anticipated bridal shower this coming Saturday afternoon. She reviewed the ambiguous words one last time, feeling a strange surge of adrenaline, and confidently pressed the send button. Miles away, standing inside their newly remodeled, imported marble kitchen, Elena and Hector stared intently at the glowing screen of their own device. The incoming message illuminated their greedy faces. Hector let out a loud, booming laugh of pure relief, slapping the expensive countertop triumphantly. Elena smiled a wicked, deeply satisfied smile, exchanging a victorious, knowing glance with her husband. From the adjacent living room, Isabella squealed with absolute delight, immediately drafting another self-congratulatory post for her adoring fans. The matriarch gracefully poured a generous glass of premium imported wine, raising the crystal goblet to toast another wildly successful extortion of their primary asset. They celebrated their perceived total victory loudly, completely blinded by their own arrogance, blissfully unaware of the devastating, unstoppable reckoning that was currently marching steadily toward their precious, exclusive weekend celebration. The crisp evening wind swept across the expansive, privately rented rooftop terrace located high above Chicago's trendy West Loop neighborhood. Golden hour sunlight reflected off the towering glass skyscrapers, casting a warm, highly expensive glow over the meticulously decorated event space. String lights swayed gently above precisely arranged floral centerpieces composed entirely of imported white orchids and lush greenery. Waiters wearing pressed black uniforms circulated effortlessly among 50 carefully selected attendees, balancing heavy silver trays loaded with delicate culinary creations and tall, crystal flutes of premium sparkling wine. The atmosphere crackled with a manufactured elegance, specifically designed to project a flawless image of effortless, boundless prosperity to anyone observing the gathering. Every single detail, from the ambient jazz music floating through the hidden speakers to the custom embroidered cocktail napkins, screamed of generational wealth and undeniable status. On one side of the luxurious terrace stood Cameron's parents, Richard and Martha. They were remarkably polite, softly spoken, retired educators from a quiet Midwestern suburb, appearing slightly overwhelmed by the sheer, unapologetic extravagance of the afternoon. Their remarkably modest demeanor contrasted sharply with the other half of the guest list, which consisted primarily of Hector's affluent business associates and Elena's hyper-competitive country club acquaintances. Hector and Elena were completely in their absolute element, gliding seamlessly through the packed crowd like royalty, surveying their loyal subjects. Elena wore a stunning emerald green designer gown, her laughter ringing out a little too loudly every single time a wealthy neighbor complimented the exquisite floral arrangements. She absorbed the constant admiration like a parched desert drinking in a sudden rainstorm. Hector, meanwhile, held court near the private mahogany bar, a thick, luxury cigar remaining unlit in his right hand as he bragged aggressively about his commercial real estate portfolio to a captive audience of eager junior executives. He had spent decades meticulously curating this specific public persona of the unstoppable self-made tycoon who could casually fund his youngest daughter's extravagant lifestyle without ever needing to check his bank balance. As Claudia observed the highly theatrical performance from a quiet, shadowy corner, the heavy black leather folder felt like a solid anchor in her hands. The sleek surface of the binder was cool to the touch, contrasting sharply with the anxious heat radiating from her skin. Before she could find a fleeting moment of peace to collect her racing thoughts, a remarkably firm grip latched tightly onto her forearm. Isabella materialized suddenly from the bustling crowd, her flawlessly contoured face flushed with adrenaline, and perhaps one too many glasses of expensive champagne. The bride-to-be dragged her older sibling forcefully behind a towering, decorative wooden trellis, completely out of sight from their adoring audience. Isabella's brown eyes were incredibly wide, glittering with a manic, insatiable hunger that Claudia recognized instantly from their childhood. Growing up, Isabella never truly understood the concept of a financial ceiling or personal boundaries. Whenever she received exactly what she demanded, the initial thrill vanished almost immediately, rapidly replaced by a desperate, agonizing need for something bigger, shinier, and vastly more expensive. Now, mere days after supposedly securing the incredibly rare dream venue, she had predictably discovered a brand new obsession to conquer. Isabella leaned in uncomfortably close, whispering frantically that a standard premium open bar was completely unacceptable for someone marrying into Cameron's prominent family. Isabella aggressively demanded with absolute sincerity that the overall wedding budget be instantly increased to $100,000 to accommodate a custom-built interactive champagne wall featuring professional aerial acrobats pouring drinks upside down for the astonished attendees. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the escalating request was completely staggering. A younger, more fragile version of Claudia would have experienced a full-blown panic attack right there behind the wooden trellis. The mere thought of sourcing another massive pile of cash just to satisfy a fleeting social media trend would have sent her spiraling into a deep, paralyzing depression. Instead, a profound, chilling sense of absolute tranquility washed over her entire body. She looked directly at her sister's demanding, entitled expression and felt absolutely nothing but cold, distant pity. Claudia simply nodded her head calmly. She did not argue the logistics. She did not point out the sheer financial insanity of hiring circus performers for a brief cocktail hour. She merely tightened her grip on the heavy leather folder and offered a polite, totally empty smile. Isabella immediately interpreted this silence as total, unconditional submission. Squealing with supreme delight before darting back into the crowded party to locate her wealthy fiancé, completely convinced she had successfully extracted yet another massive financial concession from her endlessly obedient personal bank. Just as Isabella vanished into the dense sea of designer clothing, a sharp, clear, ringing sound violently pierced the ambient chatter. Hector stood confidently at the very center of the rooftop, loudly clinking a heavy silver spoon against the delicate side of his crystal champagne flute. The scattered conversations died down instantly as the 50 elite guests turned their collective attention toward the grinning patriarch. The setting sun cast a long, dramatic shadow behind him, amplifying his commanding, authoritative physical presence. This was the exact moment he lived for, the absolute center of attention, holding the incredible power to shape the permanent narrative for everyone listening. The dramatic irony dripping from his subsequent words was so incredibly thick, it was almost tangible in the evening air. He began a long, incredibly pompous speech about the profound importance of traditional family values and unshakable loyalty. He spoke with expertly rehearsed emotional breaks in his deep voice, weaving a completely fabricated tale about how hard he and Elena had worked to build a solid foundation of absolute honesty and integrity for their beautiful children. He looked directly at Cameron's modest parents, praising the incoming union of two honest, hard-working lineages rooted in mutual respect. Every single word escaping his mouth was a calculated lie, masking the horrific financial abuse happening constantly behind their closed doors. The sheer hypocrisy of his speech was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Then Hector expertly shifted the spotlight, executing the final phase of his brilliant social trap. He dramatically gestured toward the quiet corner where Claudia stood silently. He spoke passionately about the beautiful concept of sacrifice, explaining to the captivated audience how a true family always supports one another unconditionally during major life milestones. He proudly announced to the wealthy business partners, the gossiping neighbors, and the future in-laws that his incredible eldest daughter had graciously offered to completely underwrite the wedding of the century. He framed it not as a ruthless extortion attempt, but as a beautiful, spontaneous act of pure sisterly devotion. He was painting her completely into a corner, weaponizing the intense social pressure of the elite crowd to guarantee her absolute compliance. He called her a shining beacon of duty, intentionally using glowing language designed to make her look incredibly noble, while secretly trapping her in a permanent financial prison. The trap was sprung with absolute, flawless precision. With a final, expansive, flourishing gesture, Hector enthusiastically motioned for Claudia to join him at the front microphone. He loudly requested that she come forward to officially present the initial financial commitment to the incredibly happy couple, cementing the perfect fairy tale in front of the entire glittering assembly. The 50 guests erupted into enthusiastic, highly expectant applause. They turned their smiling faces toward her, waiting eagerly to witness a heartwarming display of immense familial generosity. The collective social pressure was a suffocating, almost unbearable physical weight, exactly as Hector had calculated it would be. But as Claudia stepped out from behind the floral trellis, she did not reach into her handbag for a checkbook. She walked slowly and deliberately across the expansive rooftop, the crisp evening air rustling the fabric of her simple dress. In her right hand, she carried the thick, imposing black leather folder, holding it tightly against her side. The elite crowd continued to clap loudly, their eyes shining with misplaced admiration, completely unaware that the famously obedient daughter was not bringing a gift of financial salvation. She was carrying a meticulously documented, undeniable ledger of their crimes, marching steadily forward to permanently dismantle the entire fraudulent family dynasty in front of the very society they sacrificed her to impress. The metallic stem of the audio equipment felt freezing against Claudia's palm as she adjusted the height to accommodate her stature. A sudden, piercing shriek of electronic feedback sliced through the twilight, causing several affluent attendees in the front row to physically recoil and clutch their delicate crystal beverages tightly. 50 pairs of expectant eyes locked onto her position, their collective expressions radiating polite anticipation, fully prepared to endure a predictable, syrupy monologue regarding sibling affection. Throughout her entire existence, the eldest daughter had operated exclusively in the invisible margins of these grandiose domestic productions. Whenever her younger sister twirled center stage and her parents absorbed the adoration, Claudia remained the hidden engine, managing the grueling logistics, settling vendor disputes, repairing torn fabrics, and swallowing the mounting anxiety. Tonight, however, the fundamental power dynamic experienced a seismic shift. Her hands remained completely steady. Her respiration was slow and measured, grounded by the sheer density of the imposing black portfolio resting upon the wooden lectern. A few paces away, the patriarch stood tall. His chest expanded with arrogant satisfaction, flashing a sickeningly triumphant smile that practically demanded her immediate, unquestioning submission. Leaning into the microphone, she began her address. She did not shout, nor did she permit the slightest tremor of sadness to compromise her delivery. Instead, her cadence mirrored that of a ruthless corporate liquidator presenting a catastrophic financial autopsy to a room of disgraced executives. She unfastened the dark cover, the sharp snap reverberating like a fired projectile across the hushed terrace. Her index finger landed precisely on the topmost row of a heavily annotated spreadsheet. Directing her piercing gaze squarely at her bewildered father, she initiated the reckoning. During the winter of 2019, she announced, her enunciation slicing cleanly through the humid breeze, you summoned me into your private study, manufacturing a hysterical breakdown. You explicitly claimed the lending institution was initiating immediate foreclosure actions against our childhood residents. You extracted $40,000 under the explicit pretense of saving our sanctuary from the auction block. A confused, uneasy murmur rippled rapidly among the gathered crowd. This narrative drastically deviated from acceptable celebratory etiquette. The patriarch's previously unshakable posture wilted slightly. A microscopic facial spasm, betraying his crumbling confidence. Claudia calmly turned the page, elevating a certified banking document for the entire congregation to observe. Official transactional histories secured during an exhaustive forensic audit completed merely 48 hours ago confirm that the referenced mortgage emergency was an absolute premeditated fiction. The capital I surrendered never approached any legitimate financial institution. Conversely, $15,000 was routed directly to an international student housing syndicate to finance an extended European vacation. The remaining $25,000 was immediately diverted to a premium architectural contractor specializing in imported Italian masonry. All residual warmth instantly vanished from the older man's complexion, transforming his face into a mask of sickly, translucent gray. He attempted to formulate a verbal defense, yet his vocal cords stubbornly refused to produce sound. Standing adjacent to him, the matriarch frantically scrambled to salvage their rapidly disintegrating social standing. She emitted a shrill, desperately artificial giggle, waving her heavily jeweled hands dismissively toward the bewildered guests. Oh, she is just reciting a wonderfully absurd avant-garde performance piece, the mother squawked, her panicked eyes darting wildly around the perimeter, hunting for a single sympathetic soul willing to accept the pathetic rationalization. Claudia completely ignored the frantic interruption. She marginally increased her volume, her tone sharpening into an unforgiving surgical instrument. She systematically annihilated their carefully constructed mythology, shining a blinding light onto the corrupted foundation buried beneath their upper crust masquerade. There was never any looming eviction, the speaker projected forcefully, surveying the stunned features of the neighborhood aristocrats. Rather, my father independently authorized a massive home equity credit line, utilizing the property as collateral, to siphon a massive reservoir of unearned wealth. When that particular resource was eventually exhausted, they established a fictitious corporate entity, a phantom consulting enterprise registered under a fabricated address, engineered solely to launder assets away from legitimate creditors and directly into their personal investment portfolios. For over 2 decades, the matriarch had fought viciously to ascend the local socioeconomic hierarchy, organizing endless charity galas and hosting decadent luncheons to cement her prestige among the regional elite. Her entire psychological framework depended upon projecting an illusion of flawless, generational prosperity. Having her most guarded, insidious economic transgressions broadcasted through a public address system stripped her of every defense mechanism. The influential associates she fought relentlessly to dazzle were currently staring back at her with undisguised, palpable revulsion. The ensuing atmosphere grew unbearably dense, suffocating under the crushing pressure of undeniable reality. Yet the most devastating tactical strike remained undeployed. Claudia rotated her head away from her immobilized parents, locking her focus entirely upon the handsome fiancé standing near the beverage station. The groom's previously radiant demeanor had collapsed into an expression of profound, agonizing bewilderment. He originated from a deeply traditional, fiercely honorable lineage that prioritized integrity and transparent conduct above all other virtues. His own parents observed the unfolding disaster with wide, terrified expressions. A fleeting pulse of genuine sympathy for the collateral victim crossed Claudia's mind, but the unstoppable engine of justice propelled her forward. Sensing the inescapable conclusion, the bride-to-be launched herself forward with a primal, terrified shriek, her expensive silk gown tangling awkwardly around her designer footwear. "Cease speaking immediately," the younger sibling screeched, her meticulously painted features contorting into an unrecognizable display of pure hysteria. The older sibling disregarded the outburst entirely, maintaining an unbreakable visual connection with the stunned man across the room. Exactly 3 weeks prior, she stated with absolute clarity, a wire transfer totaling $15,000 departed from my depleted emergency reserves. The ultimate destination was a highly restricted, appointment-only jeweler located in Manhattan. The invoice details matched the exact cut, clarity, and setting of the diamond currently resting upon your future bride's left hand. She did not patiently wait for a genuine proposal. She orchestrated the entire romantic narrative and procured her own jewelry utilizing my stolen currency to artificially manufacture your permanent marital commitment. A unified, involuntary gasp erupted from the assembly, violently extracting the remaining oxygen from the environment. The exposed sister collapsed dramatically into a wrought iron chair, hiding her weeping face behind trembling hands, realizing her lucrative digital influencer empire had just disintegrated into worthless ash. The groom instinctively retreated several paces, establishing a vast physical chasm between himself and the sobbing stranger he had promised to marry. He glared at the sparkling stone on her finger as though it were a radioactive isotope, recognizing it as the ultimate manifestation of a deceitful, predatory snare. Recognizing the precise moment to intervene, the seasoned accountant glided smoothly from the peripheral shadows. Ben operated with supreme quiet efficiency. He carried a substantial stack of freshly printed dossiers, each packet containing the irrefutable timeline, the banking confirmations, and the forged correspondence. He deposited the first compilation directly into the trembling hands of the disgraced patriarch, then calmly navigated the floor to present a second copy to the physically nauseated groom. The indisputable mathematical evidence was currently circulating freely among the high society audience, completely obliterating any potential strategy for denial or subsequent gaslighting. The meticulously curated American dream of the prosperous, self-reliant dynasty was brutally unmasked as a parasitic, predatory scheme. Claudia snapped the heavy leather binder shut with a resonant, authoritative crack. She surveyed the spectacular carnage she had successfully unleashed. The extravagant celebration was fundamentally deceased, transforming instantly into a graveyard of shattered reputations and terminated engagements. She adjusted the microphone one final time, guaranteeing her concluding verdict would echo flawlessly across the ruined festivities. You stood on this stage moments ago and demanded an additional $85,000 to bankroll this ridiculous theatrical charade, she declared, her voice dropping to a chillingly tranquil frequency that commanded absolute silence. Consider that exorbitant invoice paid, in full, automatically deducted from the $214,500 you have systematically stolen from my future over the past decade. Do not ever attempt to contact me again. The bank is closed. Without pausing to register their shattered reactions, she pivoted away from the lectern, securing the dark ledger firmly beneath her shoulder. She strode purposefully through the voluntarily parted sea of paralyzed spectators, descending the illuminated staircase into the crisp, liberating night, leaving her former abusers entirely entombed within the catastrophic wreckage of their own arrogant design. The descent from the luxury terrace felt remarkably swift. Claudia navigated the concrete stairs alongside the forensic accountant, their footsteps echoing softly through the hollow descending stairwell. The humid Chicago atmosphere embraced them completely as they finally exited the towering structure and stepped onto the bustling pavement. A profound, beautiful quietness immediately replaced the suffocating aristocratic chatter of the ruined gala. They walked together toward the transit station without exchanging a single spoken syllable. The protagonist closed her eyes briefly, allowing her chest to expand freely, taking in massive quantities of uncontaminated urban oxygen. For 3 long decades, a heavy, invisible anchor had aggressively compressed her lungs, dictating her every movement and regulating her emotional temperature. That suffocating weight vanished the exact second the elevator doors sealed her abusers upstairs. The adrenaline slowly drained from her bloodstream, leaving behind a profound sense of physical exhaustion mixed with an undeniable, intoxicating flavor of absolute liberation. Dawn arrived several hours later, painted in brilliant hues of soft violet and muted orange across the expansive skyline. The subsequent daybreak found the newly liberated sister sitting comfortably by her kitchen window. The rhythmic dripping of the espresso machine provided a highly soothing mechanical soundtrack to the morning. Ben stood casually near the granite counter, carefully pouring the dark, roasted liquid into 2 identical ceramic mugs. He possessed a lengthy history of dissecting massive corporate embezzlements, routinely watching wealthy executives crumble under federal scrutiny. Yet he previously confessed that witnessing this specific brand of intimate domestic extortion felt uniquely disturbing. He slid one warm vessel across the smooth surface toward his host. The rich aroma of roasted beans offered a deeply comforting tether to the present reality. This domestic tranquility contrasted violently with the absolute catastrophe currently consuming her former relatives. A glowing cellular device rested quietly upon the wooden dining table. It remained completely silent for 12 consecutive hours. The relentless buzzing that once dictated her daily anxiety levels was entirely, wonderfully absent. Eventually, the glass screen illuminated brightly. An incoming audio transmission shattered the morning calm. The digital identifier displayed the name Maria. This particular cousin operated as a distinct anomaly within the otherwise toxic lineage. Growing up, Maria possessed a sharp intellect, but severely lacked the aggressive, cutthroat ambition required to survive Elena's endless social warfare. Consequently, the observant relative retreated permanently into the background shadows, silently documenting the systemic dysfunction while desperately avoiding the matriarch's vindictive wrath. Claudia accepted the digital connection. The voice emitting from the small speaker sounded simultaneously breathless and deeply fascinated. Maria proceeded to deliver a meticulous, highly descriptive post-mortem regarding the destroyed celebration. Once the elevator departed the rooftop, the cousin explained the sophisticated gathering immediately descended into pure, unfiltered anarchy. The wealthy groom did not hesitate for a single second. Cameron immediately cornered his weeping fiancée, demanding absolute transparency regarding the diamond transaction. His conservative Midwestern upbringing prioritized uncompromising honesty and quiet dignity above all other character traits. Discovering his permanent romantic commitment originated from a fraudulent financial scheme completely shattered his foundational worldview. He instantly recognized the profound, calculated manipulation required to execute such a deception. According to the informant on the phone, the betrayed man removed his tailored suit jacket, gathered his utterly horrified parents, and departed the rented venue within 5 short minutes. He left the sobbing bride completely abandoned near the decorative floral arrangements, severing their connection with surgical precision. Isabella dramatically collapsed onto the expensive decking, wailing loudly into her hands. Realizing her lucrative digital influencer empire and her guaranteed admission into the upper class had just disintegrated into worthless ash. Stripped entirely of their prestigious audience, the older generation immediately cannibalized one another. The patriarch and his wife shared a matrimony constructed entirely upon mutual opportunism and the projection of superficial prosperity. Whenever that delicate prosperity faltered, their manufactured affection evaporated instantly. The cousin described a spectacular, vicious, public screaming match echoing loudly across the expensive terrace. Hector furiously blamed his spouse's insatiable appetite for designer kitchen renovations and neighborhood dominance for draining their resources. Elena shrieked back with equal venom, aggressively criticizing her husband's pathetic inability to generate legitimate capital without resorting to covert property equity theft. They unleashed decades of hidden resentments and buried hatred directly in front of the remaining bewildered business executives. Their meticulously curated American dream completely unraveled, exposing the ugly, parasitic reality underneath the designer clothing. "What about the others?" Claudia inquired softly, taking a slow, deliberate sip of the warm beverage. The vast network of gossiping aunts and judgmental peers had completely evaporated into thin air. The relatives who previously weaponized digital text messages to enforce mandatory generosity were currently paralyzed by extreme mortification. Discovering their beloved, successful patriarch was essentially a common thief, utterly destroyed their misplaced communal pride. The rigid social ecosystem that demanded constant tribute and silent obedience suddenly collapsed under the undeniable weight of mathematical evidence. Aunt Rosa and Cousin David fled the scene through a service elevator, too deeply ashamed to make eye contact with any remaining attendees. The psychological warfare they enthusiastically participated in had violently backfired, leaving them trapped in the radioactive fallout of their own blind loyalty. The communication eventually concluded, leaving the apartment bathed in a serene golden morning glow. The protagonist observed the bustling urban streets below her window, watching anonymous citizens hurry toward their respective destinations. A profound realization washed over her entire being. She recognized with absolute certainty that she would never again occupy a dining chair where her singular purpose involved opening a checkbook to purchase temporary affection. The endless cycle of guilt, manipulation, and extortion was permanently broken. However, the ultimate consequence of exposing such brazen financial crimes extended far beyond broken romantic engagements and fractured family dynamics. Ben walked over to the table, turning his illuminated laptop screen toward Claudia. The corporate world operates with ruthless, unsentimental efficiency. The wealthy executives attending the disastrous party managed vast commercial real estate portfolios and massive investment funds. Witnessing Hector's public exposure as a fraudulent, desperate operator triggered an immediate, devastating chain reaction within the financial sector. Fiduciary duty explicitly prevents legitimate investors from associating with known liars. By 9 o'clock, that exact same Monday morning, every major commercial lending institution in the Metropolitan District flagged the patriarch's accounts for critical, mandatory review. The massive credit lines he utilized to float his extravagant lifestyle were instantaneously frozen. His fabricated empire was not merely socially embarrassed. It was economically exterminated. The American standard of ruthless financial pragmatism had swiftly judged him delivering a permanent, catastrophic penalty, far more devastating than any personal estrangement. The predators were finally completely bankrupt. The morning sun illuminated the expansive glass windows of Zenith Freight Logistics, casting long geometric shadows across the polished concrete floor. Claudia established this premier supply chain enterprise completely from scratch, transforming a modest initial investment into a regional powerhouse. Within these soundproofed walls, she reigned supreme, controlling complex shipping routes and managing millions of dollars in commercial cargo. Her corporate headquarters served as an impenetrable fortress, entirely separate from the emotional manipulation dominating her domestic existence. Here, mathematics and efficiency governed every decision. She had spent a decade navigating a fiercely competitive male-dominated industry, utilizing sheer grit and unmatched logistical brilliance to secure her independence. However, that sacred compartmentalization shattered violently, precisely at 10 o'clock, when a stranger wearing a drab gray suit bypassed the reception desk. He approached her executive suite, confirmed her identity with a monotonous tone, and dropped a thick manila envelope onto her pristine mahogany desk. The man announced she had been officially served before turning on his heel and vanishing into the bustling corridor. Opening the heavy packet, the logistics executive stared at the formal legal heading. The plaintiff was Hector. Her own father had officially initiated a civil lawsuit against her in the state court system. The primary allegation read as a breach of verbal contract. The meticulously typed pages claimed that Claudia had made a legally binding oral promise to fully finance Isabella's extravagant wedding ceremony. Furthermore, the petition demanded not only the original $85,000, but added exorbitant punitive damages for severe intentional infliction of emotional distress. The sheer audacity of the document stole the breath from her lungs. It was a masterpiece of manufactured victimhood, completely omitting the forensic audit and the stolen home equity funds. To comprehend this aggressive legal maneuver, one must understand the absolute fragility of Hector's monstrous ego. Following the catastrophic implosion at the rooftop engagement party, his meticulously crafted reputation among Chicago's elite commercial developers completely disintegrated. Financial institutions immediately froze his active credit lines due to the exposure of his fraudulent property equity schemes. In American business culture, a ruined reputation equals total economic death. Hector desperately needed a scapegoat to salvage his plummeting status. By filing a highly public lawsuit, he was aggressively rewriting the narrative. He positioned himself not as a manipulative predator, but as the tragically betrayed patriarch of an ungrateful, malicious daughter who destroyed her sister's happiness out of pure spite. It was a calculated, ruthless offensive, designed to force her back into submission while simultaneously restoring his standing among his wealthy peers. Before she could fully process the absurdity of the legal threat, her desk telephone began ringing frantically. The incoming caller identification displayed the name of her most lucrative corporate account, a massive industrial manufacturer responsible for 40% of her annual revenue. Taking a deep, stabilizing breath, she answered the line, projecting her usual confident, professional demeanor. Instead of discussing their upcoming quarterly shipping schedules, the senior executive on the other end sounded incredibly tense and unusually hesitant. He cleared his throat nervously, mentioning that highly concerning rumors were currently circulating throughout the industry regarding Zenith Freight's underlying financial stability. A cold, paralyzing dread flooded Claudia's veins. She pressed the executive for specific details. The customer reluctantly admitted that a prominent local real estate developer had personally contacted several board members earlier that morning. This unnamed developer claimed to possess insider knowledge that Claudia was currently under federal investigation for massive insolvency and imminent bankruptcy. The caller apologetically stated that they might need to suspend their upcoming distribution contracts until the troubling situation reached a satisfactory resolution. The connection terminated, leaving a dial tone humming loudly in the suddenly suffocating office. Hector was not merely suing her. He was actively executing a scorched earth smear campaign to obliterate her livelihood. He understood perfectly well that he possessed no legitimate standing to win a frivolous contract dispute over a canceled party. The lawsuit merely served as a smokescreen. His true objective involved weaponizing his extensive network of country club acquaintances and golf course confidants to plant toxic seeds of doubt regarding her professional solvency. The global supply chain industry operates entirely on mutual trust and reliable credit. By attacking her financial credibility, he struck directly at her most vulnerable artery. He intended to starve her out, destroying the independent empire she built, thereby forcing her to crawl back home, begging for mercy. The poison of her family dynamics had successfully breached the castle walls, infecting her professional sanctuary. Seeking immediate guidance, the embattled entrepreneur scheduled an emergency consultation with her lead corporate attorney, a seasoned litigator named Robert. Sitting inside his austere downtown boardroom, Robert reviewed the civil complaint with a deeply cynical expression. He explained the terrifying reality of the contemporary American legal apparatus. The justice system frequently allows wealthy, aggressive individuals to file completely baseless claims simply to harass their targets. Even though Hector's allegations lacked any factual merit, defending against the lawsuit would demand hundreds of billable hours, endless depositions, and massive capital expenditures. Robert warned that fighting this battle could easily consume her entire operational budget, potentially driving her firm into actual ruin, while simultaneously battling the malicious industry rumors. The multifaceted attack triggered a profound psychological collapse within the protagonist. For her entire adult life, she survived the relentless domestic abuse through strict mental compartmentalization. When her mother demanded luxurious kitchen renovations, Claudia worked grueling overtime shifts, using her professional triumphs to mask her private suffering. Her company was the singular aspect of her identity that remained untainted by their insatiable greed. Now, watching her quarterly projections plummet and her loyal employees facing potential layoffs due to canceled contracts, the internal barrier completely evaporated. She experienced severe insomnia, her mind racing through endless, terrifying scenarios where she lost absolutely everything she had sacrificed decades to build. The mounting pressure felt like a physical vice, clamping down heavily upon her skull. Every single day brought a fresh disaster. Another vendor demanded upfront cash payments because they heard whispers of her impending doom. A secondary client abruptly canceled a lucrative regional distribution agreement, citing vague concerns about corporate reliability. The sheer injustice of the situation burned fiercely in her chest. She had finally stood up to her lifelong abusers, armed with undeniable mathematical evidence of their generational theft, only to find herself being systematically dismantled by the very society she thought would protect her. The predators were utilizing the established legal framework and informal business networks to exact their vicious revenge. Desperation often breeds profound ingenuity. Sitting alone in her darkened office late on a Friday evening, surrounded by towering stacks of canceled invoices and intimidating legal threats, she refused to accept defeat. She booted up her secure workstation, deciding to conduct a deep forensic analysis of the smear campaign itself. She needed to map exactly how the rumors were spreading so quickly across different state lines. She meticulously cross-referenced the timestamps of her canceled client contracts with the digital logs provided by her cybersecurity monitoring software. She started tracing the origin points of the anonymous tips that had flooded her vendors' communication portals. That is when the brilliant, astonishing twist materialized on her glowing monitor. Hector's overwhelming arrogance had caused him to commit a fatal, unrecoverable blunder. In his desperate haste to destroy his daughter's reputation, he did not rely solely on untraceable voice calls. He had dispatched a series of highly defamatory electronic messages to her largest industrial clients, explicitly detailing her fabricated financial ruin. However, he forgot that his personal computer networks were still heavily compromised from the recent audit. More importantly, he transmitted those malicious, fraudulent documents using the official email server belonging to his phantom consulting firm, the exact same fake corporate entity he previously utilized to launder the stolen mortgage funds. Claudia stared at the screen, a slow, dangerous smile finally breaking through her exhaustion. By utilizing that specific, fabricated business address to send defamatory lies across state lines in a deliberate attempt to sabotage a legitimate competitor, Hector had unwittingly elevated his petty domestic retaliation into a severe federal offense. He had committed undeniable, documented corporate wire fraud while actively engaging in interstate commerce manipulation. The civil lawsuit regarding a verbal wedding contract was suddenly entirely irrelevant. The stakes had just escalated from a minor local court dispute to the absolute highest echelons of federal criminal jurisdiction. She immediately picked up her phone to contact Ben, knowing precisely how they would launch their devastating counterstrike. The interior of Zenith Freight Logistics felt distinctly electric on Tuesday morning. Claudia and Ben were meticulously compiling the necessary documentation to counter the malicious corporate defamation launched by Hector. They gathered printed server logs, timestamps, and routing numbers, preparing a flawless federal wire fraud dossier. Suddenly, the private cellular device resting beside the computer monitor vibrated with an unknown number. Claudia answered cautiously, expecting another panicked vendor or a hostile legal representative. Instead, a remarkably quiet, deeply defeated voice responded through the speaker. It was Cameron. The wealthy heir requested a brief, confidential meeting at a neutral location, explicitly stating he needed to speak with both the logistics executive and the forensic accountant simultaneously. Understanding the potential significance of this unexpected olive branch, Claudia agreed instantly. They selected a secluded, dimly lit corner booth inside an upscale tea room located 3 blocks away from the logistics headquarters. When the former groom arrived, his physical appearance was genuinely shocking. The confident, immaculately groomed aristocrat who had charmed the elite rooftop gathering just 72 hours prior was entirely gone. Cameron looked completely hollowed out. Dark, bruised circles framed his bloodshot eyes. His usually perfect posture had collapsed into a heavy, exhausted slouch. He wore a simple, unpressed gray sweater, looking remarkably fragile as he slid into the leather seating across from the 2 professionals. He ordered a plain black coffee, wrapped his trembling hands around the warm porcelain mug, and stared down at the dark liquid for several long moments before finally speaking. To comprehend the profound devastation Cameron was currently experiencing, one must understand the specific environment that forged him. He hailed from a long lineage of traditional conservative Midwestern industrialists. His family possessed immense generational wealth, but they vehemently rejected flashy displays of affluence. They valued quiet dignity, absolute transparency, and unshakable moral integrity above all other attributes. When Cameron initially met Isabella, he mistook her aggressive social climbing for genuine ambition and vibrant passion. He was completely captivated by her bright, energetic facade, blissfully unaware that her sparkling personality was merely a highly polished mirror designed exclusively to reflect his own desires back at him. Discovering the horrific reality beneath her manufactured perfection had severely traumatized his foundational understanding of human nature. Taking a deep, unsteady breath, the exhausted man began to recount the agonizing events of the previous evening. After fleeing the disastrous engagement celebration, he demanded a private, uninterrupted conversation with his fiancée regarding the explosive allegations. He desperately wanted Isabella to explain the banking anomalies, praying she had some logical justification for the massive discrepancy. Instead of offering a tearful confession or seeking genuine forgiveness, she launched a terrifyingly vicious psychological counterattack. Cameron described watching the woman he loved transform into an entirely different, chillingly cold entity right before his eyes. Isabella possessed a deeply ingrained narcissistic defense mechanism cultivated over decades of parental enabling. From her earliest childhood memories, Elena and Hector conditioned her to believe she was the undisputed protagonist of the universe. Whenever reality contradicted her glorious internal narrative, she simply rewrote the facts to suit her immediate needs. Taking accountability was a completely foreign concept to her mind. Therefore, when confronted with absolute, undeniable proof of her financial depravity, she instinctively deployed a textbook gaslighting strategy. She stared directly into Cameron's eyes and adamantly insisted that the entire forensic ledger was a malicious forgery. She spun a wildly elaborate, deeply unhinged conspiracy theory. Isabella vehemently claimed that her older sister was a violently jealous, vindictive spinster who had spent years obsessively plotting to destroy this beautiful romantic union. The younger sibling shrieked that Claudia fabricated the wire transfers hacked into the boutique jeweler database and bribed the architectural contractor just to humiliate their innocent family. The sheer scale of the delusion terrified Cameron. He realized Isabella was not simply lying to protect herself. She genuinely believed her own fabricated reality, demonstrating a terrifying detachment from objective truth. The mask had slipped completely, revealing a predatory, bottomless void where her conscience should have resided. The absolute breaking point occurred when Cameron demanded she remove the $15,000 diamond from her left hand so he could personally verify the serial number laser engraved upon the band. Isabella violently refused, clutching the stolen jewelry against her chest like a feral animal protecting its prey. In that precise, horrifying moment, ultimate clarity washed over the betrayed man. He realized every single aspect of their relationship was constructed upon a foundation of parasitic entitlement and unearned luxury. The sparkling ring was not a symbol of their eternal devotion. It was a physical monument to sibling abuse, purchased with stolen funds to artificially trap him into a lucrative marital contract. The terrifying truth paralyzed his heart completely. Without raising his voice, Cameron informed his fiancée that the impending wedding was permanently canceled. He packed a single suitcase, surrendered his keys to their shared luxury apartment, and walked out the door, ignoring her sudden transition from furious accusations to hysterical, begging sobs. Sitting inside the quiet tea room, he looked across the wooden table directly into Claudia's empathetic eyes. He offered a profound, desperately sincere apology. He admitted that during the past 3 years, he had blindly accepted Isabella's twisted characterization of the logistics executive. He had incorrectly assumed the older sister was just another complicit, detached trust fund baby who casually threw excessive amounts of cash at domestic problems to avoid genuine emotional connection. The wealthy heir confessed his deep shame for misjudging her character so completely. He acknowledged the staggering, silent sacrifices she had endured to protect the family secret. Claudia listened carefully, her expression remaining calm and remarkably gracious. She did not harbor any resentment toward the broken man sitting across from her. She recognized Cameron instantly for what he truly was in this tragic scenario. He was simply another innocent casualty, caught inside the ruthless, destructive gears of the Vasquez public relations machine. Her parents and sister consumed human beings like disposable fuel, and Cameron had barely escaped the furnace with his sanity intact. She softly accepted his apology, offering a gentle nod of profound mutual understanding that transcended the need for further explanation. Ben reached across the table, shaking Cameron's hand with quiet respect. The defeated aristocrat paid for the beverages, stood up slowly, and exited the establishment, disappearing into the busy pedestrian traffic outside the window. With his departure, the entire romantic subplot and the agonizing social pressure surrounding the impending nuptials vanished completely. The secondary conflicts were permanently swept away. Isabella had officially lost her billionaire meal ticket, severing the final thread connecting the fraudulent dynasty to the upper echelons of Chicago high society. However, this monumental victory brought a terrifying new realization. Claudia watched the tea room door swing shut, feeling a sudden icy chill crawl down her spine. By losing Cameron Hector, and Elena had just lost their ultimate financial parachute. The lucrative marriage they desperately relied upon to save their crumbling empire was entirely dead. The absolute worst, most dangerous entity on the planet is a cornered predator with absolutely nothing left to lose. Stripped of their future security and humiliated before their peers, her parents would undoubtedly escalate their corporate smear campaign from a desperate defensive maneuver into an all-out, destructive holy war. The logistics executive turned toward her trusted accountant, realizing the final, most brutal battle for her professional survival was only just beginning. The afternoon sun baked the concrete exterior of the commercial shipping facility, casting long geometric shadows across the meticulously manicured lawns. Inside the climate-controlled executive suite, the atmosphere remained remarkably serene. The owner of the logistics empire sat peacefully behind her expansive desk, reviewing the latest quarterly distribution manifests. This quiet productivity shattered instantly when the heavy oak door violently swung open without any prior announcement from the reception area. The protagonist did not flinch, nor did her heart rate accelerate. Standing in the threshold were the two individuals responsible for her lifelong psychological misery. The patriarch possessed a long, heavily documented history of utilizing sheer physical presence to intimidate his perceived adversaries. During his prime years constructing his supposedly massive real estate portfolio, he would frequently storm into municipal planning offices uninvited. He relied upon his booming baritone voice and towering height to bully nervous city clerks into approving highly dubious zoning permits. His wife always accompanied these theatrical ambushes, hovering quietly in the background to provide silent, judgmental reinforcement. They operated as a predatory unit, expertly identifying vulnerabilities in others and exploiting them for maximum personal gain. They clearly intended to deploy this exact same strategy against their eldest offspring today. The older man marched directly toward the polished mahogany workspace, planting his large palms forcefully against the smooth wood. He leaned forward aggressively, attempting to cast a dominating, terrifying shadow over the seated executive. His face was flushed crimson, with a potent, toxic mixture of genuine desperation and manufactured rage. The mother stood closely beside him, clutching an expensive designer handbag against her chest like a protective leather shield. Her lips were tightly pressed into a thin, condemning line, her eyes radiating pure, unadulterated venom. They looked like cornered animals, dangerous and completely unpredictable. The intruder barked his demands with the harsh, aggressive cadence of a fallen dictator issuing final, desperate decrees. He loudly declared that the exclusive country club absolutely refused to refund the $12,000 penalty applied to the abruptly canceled nuptial celebration. He insisted, slamming his fist against the desk for dramatic emphasis, that his daughter was completely responsible for this exorbitant financial loss. Furthermore, he demanded she immediately draft a comprehensive, deeply remorseful public apology. This proposed document needed to explicitly state she had suffered a mental breakdown, taking absolute total responsibility for destroying her younger sister's future happiness. He instructed her to circulate this humiliating confession among their entire affluent social circle. If these highly specific, insulting conditions were met immediately, he generously promised to instruct his legal counsel to withdraw the pending civil litigation. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the proposition hung heavily in the silent room. Barely a year ago, this exact, aggressive maneuver would have triggered an instantaneous, debilitating panic attack within the logistics executive. She would have experienced severe chest pains, hyperventilating while desperately reaching for her checkbook, merely to extinguish the terrifying confrontation. The ingrained trauma response would have forced her into immediate compliance just to restore a fragile, toxic peace. Today, however, a profound, unshakable tranquility anchored her spirit. The intimidating performance playing out before her eyes no longer resembled a terrifying threat. It simply looked incredibly pathetic. She maintained steady, unwavering eye contact with the furious man hovering above her workspace. Moving with deliberate, practiced slowness, she reached toward the bottom drawer of her workstation. The metal hinges glided silently, an indication of the premium craftsmanship defining her independent corporate sanctuary. Her fingers wrapped around a single sheet of paper, enclosed securely within a transparent plastic protective sleeve. She placed the document precisely in the center of the desk, sliding it smoothly across the wood until it rested directly beneath her father's white-knuckled hands. This specific piece of paper represented the absolute genesis of their current catastrophic conflict. It was the heavily creased, urgently stamped bank default notice the patriarch had weaponized exactly 3 years prior. He had brought this very page into her modest apartment during a rainy evening, shedding convincing crocodile tears. He passionately claimed the financial institution was merely days away from seizing their beloved family residence and rendering them completely homeless. This singular, terrifying piece of paper successfully extracted $40,000 from her hard-earned savings accounts. It was the original sin that funded the luxury kitchen renovations and the decadent European vacations. The executive kept her vocal tone exceptionally flat, mirroring the dispassionate, objective delivery of an automated machine. She calmly informed her parents that during the extensive forensic accounting process, her corporate legal department conducted a meticulous, microscopic examination of the supposed foreclosure warning. Her expert attorneys cross-referenced the institutional routing numbers printed across the bottom margin of the page. They discovered those specific numerical sequences belonged to a regional banking branch that permanently closed its doors a full decade before the notice was supposedly generated. Furthermore, The official corporate logo stamped at the top was slightly pixelated, definitively proving it was copied and pasted from a low-resolution digital source. The document was an absolute, undeniable forgery. The older man had manufactured the fake financial crisis entirely on his personal home computer. The daughter leaned forward slightly, closing the physical distance between them, ensuring every single syllable landed with maximum impact. She explained the devastating reality of the American judicial system with razor-sharp clarity. Transmitting a digitally altered financial instrument for the explicit purpose of extracting substantial capital constitutes a severe, highly penalized criminal offense. When properly combined with the defamatory electronic messages he recently dispatched to her corporate clients using a fabricated consulting firm's server, the entire operation officially escalated into undeniable federal wire fraud. The permanent conditions of their new reality were laid out with surgical, unforgiving precision. If the patriarch, his spouse, his younger child, or his retained attorney ever attempted to contact the shipping enterprise again, the consequences would be catastrophic and immediate. If a single malicious rumor reached another vendor, or if the frivolous civil lawsuit was not completely dismissed before the municipal courts opened the following morning, she would personally deliver the forged bank notice and the compromised server logs directly to the federal authorities. There would be no dramatic family negotiations, no tearful living room reconciliations, and absolutely no hidden financial settlements. The era of secret domestic extortion was officially terminated. The psychological destruction of the arrogant man occurred instantaneously. The aggressive crimson flush drained entirely from his weathered complexion, leaving behind a sickly pale gray hue that made him look remarkably fragile. His broad shoulders collapsed inward, transforming the previously intimidating figure into a terrified, elderly person facing absolute ruin. The blustering tyrant finally recognized that his accumulated wealth, his prestigious country club memberships, and his aggressive bravado offered absolutely zero protection against a federal criminal indictment. The genuine threat of spending his twilight years incarcerated inside a government facility shattered his manufactured ego completely. The lawsuit evaporated from his mind, replaced entirely by raw, primal survival instinct. Standing adjacent to the rapidly crumbling patriarch, the mother experienced a horrifying, world-shattering epiphany. Throughout their entire prolonged marriage, she had relied heavily upon her husband's reliable ability to terrorize their opponents into absolute submission. She watched his aggressive posturing evaporate into pure, unadulterated fear. For the very first time in her adult existence, the matriarch realized they possessed absolutely zero leverage. The designated scapegoat they had tormented for decades had somehow evolved into an impenetrable, lethal fortress. The fundamental power dynamic within their toxic lineage was permanently, irrevocably inverted. They were entirely at the mercy of the daughter they had ruthlessly exploited. The defeated couple turned around slowly and shuffled silently toward the glass exit, their former glorious arrogance reduced to pathetic smoldering ruins. The executive watched the heavy door click shut, savoring the profound, beautiful silence filling her reclaimed sanctuary. She picked up the forged document, preparing to return it to the secure drawer and move forward with her remarkably successful life. Suddenly, the internal communication system on her desk chimed softly. Her administrative assistant spoke through the speaker, sounding unusually tense and highly professional. Two individuals wearing dark suits and displaying official government credentials were currently waiting in the reception area. These agents were requesting an immediate audience regarding highly suspicious interstate banking activities linked to her father's dormant commercial accounts. The executive smiled softly, realizing that while she had chosen mercy, the relentless machinery of the Federal Banking Authority had already independently chosen justice. The resounding silence left inside the executive suite following the parents' humiliating departure felt remarkably heavy, yet beautifully pristine. However, this profound tranquility proved fleeting. Less than 48 hours after successfully neutralizing the federal wire fraud threat, a different hazard emerged from the digital ether. The notification bell on the CEO's primary computer terminal chimed aggressively, announcing the arrival of an exceptionally lengthy electronic missive. The sender identifier belonged to the former bride-to-be. Until this exact moment, the younger sibling had remained entirely absent from the active battlefield, presumably licking her self-inflicted wounds while hiding away inside whatever modest accommodations she managed to secure post-eviction. Now, armed with a keyboard and fueled by raw desperation, she launched a spectacular vitriolic assault. The sprawling communication was a masterpiece of unhinged psychological projection. Paragraph after paragraph dripped with venomous accusations, painting the logistics founder as a monstrous, calculating villain. The disgraced influencer vehemently blamed her older relative for single-handedly orchestrating the catastrophic loss of the wealthy fiancé, the confiscation of the brilliant diamond ring, and the total annihilation of her carefully curated public reputation. According to this twisted narrative, the exposure of the forensic audit was not an act of necessary self-preservation, but rather a vicious display of deep-seated jealousy. The author claimed the successful entrepreneur simply could not stand witnessing someone else achieve the fairy tale ending she herself lacked. It was a classic manifestation of narcissistic rage, furiously rejecting any personal accountability. Yet, reading between the aggressively typed lines, a much darker, distinctly pathetic reality bled through the hostile rhetoric. Beneath the burning anger lay a foundation of pure, unadulterated panic. To fully comprehend this sudden digital explosion, one must examine the precarious framework of the golden child's entire existence. Approaching her 30th birthday, the pampered socialite possessed absolutely no legitimate career prospects. She had squandered her expensive university education, pursuing a completely useless degree in recreational leisure studies, spending those 4 years partying on her parents' fraudulently obtained dime. Her subsequent adult years were dedicated exclusively to manufacturing an online illusion of boundless prosperity, an endeavor that generated zero actual revenue. Consequently, she was currently suffocating beneath a mountainous avalanche of high-interest credit card debt. Without the matriarch's stolen home equity line to subsidize her luxury gym memberships, imported cosmetics, and frequent European excursions, her financial ecosystem instantly collapsed. Furthermore, the affluent groom, who was supposed to serve as her permanent economic parachute, had permanently severed all ties. She lacked any semblance of a safety net, staring down the terrifying barrel of genuine American poverty for the very first time. Her aggressive email was not a display of strength. It was the frantic thrashing of a drowning victim, realizing no lifeguard was coming to orchestrate a rescue. In previous decades, absorbing such a hateful, deeply personal attack would have completely destroyed the older sibling's emotional equilibrium. She would have spent days agonizing over the cruel words, desperately formulating a conciliatory reply to soothe the manufactured outrage. Today, sitting behind her polished mahogany desk, she experienced an astonishing lack of physiological response. Her pulse remained wonderfully steady. Her respiration was calm. She read the final venomous sentence and felt nothing except a profound clinical pity for the pathetic creature trapped inside the glowing monitor. She moved her fingers across the mechanical keyboard, deciding to offer a singular, definitive reply. She did not defend her actions, nor did she engage with the absurd conspiracy theories regarding jealousy. She typed one devastatingly concise statement. You performed your entire life for a family that taught you to value superficial status over genuine substance. And I truly hope you eventually figure out who you actually are without their constant applause. She pressed the send button, watching the brief message vanish into cyberspace. Immediately afterward, she accessed her server security settings and permanently blocked the sender's digital address, telephone number, and associated social media profiles. The invisible tether connecting her to her sister's toxic orbit was cleanly, irrevocably severed. This decisive action triggered a brand new, unexpected internal challenge. Having completely eliminated the domestic drama that had consumed so much of her mental bandwidth, the entrepreneur suddenly faced an overwhelming surplus of operational focus. She channeled this newly liberated energy directly into expanding her commercial shipping empire. During the subsequent 4 weeks, Zenith Freight experienced unprecedented growth, securing several massive distribution contracts across the Midwestern agricultural sector. These specific provincial routes involve transporting raw materials, heavy machinery, and harvested crops. It was a gritty, highly demanding logistical environment, representing the rugged, unglamorous backbone of the national economy. Interestingly, this was the exact blue-collar industry the younger sister historically ridiculed at extravagant dinner parties, frequently mocking the dirty fingernails and calloused hands of the working-class citizens who kept the country running. Exactly 1 month after the final electronic confrontation, a spectacular manifestation of poetic justice materialized inside the corporate headquarters. The CEO was conducting a routine review of an updated vendor directory submitted by a prominent agricultural partner located deep within the rural farming belt. This particular client operated a massive, dusty facility responsible for coordinating regional fertilizer shipments. As the executive scanned the freshly printed roster of essential contact personnel, her eyes abruptly halted. Listed halfway down the page, designated under the incredibly unglamorous title of Entry-Level Dispatch Coordinator, was a terrifyingly familiar name. The universe had orchestrated a flawless, brutally ironic reckoning. Stripped of her fraudulent financial backing and completely abandoned by her wealthy social circle, the disgraced socialite had faced imminent starvation. Unable to secure employment at any luxury boutiques or high-end public relations firms due to her ruined reputation, she was forced to accept whatever miserable labor she could find. To survive the crushing weight of her bankruptcy, the formerly glorious influencer was now working for minimum wage in a dilapidated, windowless office surrounded by cornfields. She was spending her days answering incessantly ringing telephones, getting screamed at by impatient truck drivers, and manually routing muddy tractors through rural highways. She was officially trapped at the absolute bottom rung of the exact same logistics industry she had spent her entire privileged youth looking down upon. The sheer magnitude of this cosmic retribution was breathtaking. However, the revelation immediately birthed a much larger, vastly more complex conflict. The entrepreneur stared intently at the agricultural company's distribution agreement resting upon her desk. A profound, shocking realization washed over her entire being, cementing the ultimate twist of their interwoven destinies. The rural agribusiness employing the fallen golden child was a relatively small, struggling operation. They relied absolutely and exclusively upon Zenith Freight's massive trucking network to deliver their product to the national markets. Without this specific corporate partnership, the provincial vendor would instantly shutter its doors, leading to immediate mass layoffs. The American capitalist machine had inadvertently handed the self-made executive the ultimate weapon. She realized with chilling clarity that she was now effectively her sister's supreme boss. By simply lifting her telephone and terminating the distribution contract due to standard operational restructuring, she could effortlessly plunge the agricultural facility into insolvency, thereby guaranteeing her sibling would be fired before the weekend arrived. She held the absolute power to financially ruin her abuser with a single, completely legal, corporate signature. The abused older daughter had become the undisputed titan of the supply chain, while the pampered princess was reduced to an expendable minimum wage pawn, entirely dependent on her estranged siblings' continued corporate mercy. She picked up the sterling silver pen, hovering the ink directly over the termination clause, staring into the middle distance as she contemplated exactly how she wished to wield this terrifying, absolute authority. 90 days evaporated since the dramatic boardroom confrontation permanently altered the trajectory of the logistics empire. The seasonal transition from sweltering summer heat to crisp autumn winds brought a profound, unfamiliar serenity to the previously embattled executive. Unburdened by the relentless parasitic drain on her personal finances, her banking ledgers swelled massively. Zenith Freight experienced exponential, unprecedented commercial growth during this tranquil quarter. However, the pending termination clause regarding the provincial agricultural vendor remained unresolved upon her polished mahogany desk. She spent multiple weeks analyzing the struggling facility and its terrible operational metrics. Instead of simply canceling their shipping agreement and plunging the rural community into devastating mass unemployment, the brilliant entrepreneur engineered a vastly more ambitious strategy. She executed a hostile corporate takeover. Through a series of aggressive legal maneuvers, Zenith Freight officially purchased the failing agribusiness outright, transforming the dusty operation into a wholly owned subsidiary. Consequently, the fallen golden child answering telephones inside that dilapidated dispatch center was no longer merely a vulnerable contractor. Isabella was now a direct official employee residing at the absolute bottom rung of the massive corporate payroll. This monumental acquisition birthed an immediate, fascinating new logistical challenge. Operating a newly absorbed regional branch required an exhaustive in-person inspection of the rural assets. Before scheduling the journey, the chief executive officer paused to reflect upon the fundamental architecture of her transformed existence. During her formative years, she believed family loyalty represented an inescapable biological prison sentence. She incorrectly assumed shared genetics demanded infinite personal suffering. Her trusted forensic accountant shattered that toxic paradigm completely. Ben originated from a remarkably mundane, profoundly stable household located in upstate New York. His parents were unremarkable public school educators who prioritized emotional consistency over superficial status. Ben introduced the radical concept that true legacy does not stem from mandatory bloodline obligations. Authentic heritage is deliberately constructed alongside chosen individuals who actively protect your psychological well-being. He operated as an impenetrable shield throughout the entire domestic warfare, demanding absolutely zero financial compensation or unearned adoration. Accompanied by her remarkably steadfast partner, the victorious founder departed the sprawling Chicago metropolis early Friday morning. They drove a sleek silver sedan toward the expansive Illinois farmlands, navigating winding roads flanked by towering stalks of golden corn. The sprawling agricultural landscape offered a stark, beautiful contrast to the suffocating, hyper-competitive suburban neighborhoods where she previously resided. Their destination was a quaint, isolated municipality located roughly 10 miles from the newly acquired dispatch facility. The primary objective involved surveying the commercial property, yet they deliberately scheduled a restorative weekend retreat to celebrate their recent triumphs. They secured accommodations inside a charming, historically preserved guest house nestled near a rushing river. Naturally, the universe absolutely despises a vacuum, and this newfound tranquility faced an abrupt, shocking challenge. While Ben finalized their overnight registration, the entrepreneur visited a nearby rustic cafe to purchase warm, caffeinated beverages. As she stood near the wooden counter waiting for the roasted coffee, a frantic, disheveled figure burst through the swinging entrance doors. The intruder was Elena. The former country club queen looked completely unrecognizable. Her previously immaculate designer clothing was replaced by wrinkled, ill-fitting discount garments. Her artificially colored hair showed deep gray roots, and her facial features sagged beneath the crushing weight of severe sleep deprivation. The disgraced matriarch had apparently hired a private investigator, using her final remaining pennies to track the estranged daughter across state lines, desperately seeking one last audience. The older woman lunged forward, collapsing dramatically onto her knees against the sticky linoleum floor, completely abandoning her lifelong obsession with public dignity. The resulting spectacle terrified the local patrons. Elena shrieked hysterically, clutching the hem of the winter coat worn by her eldest child. The mother unleashed a torrent of horrific updates. The federal banking authorities had officially indicted Hector for massive wire fraud and grand larceny. The prosecuting government attorneys were aggressively pushing for a maximum 10-year penitentiary sentence. Furthermore, the Justice Department had permanently seized every single remaining financial asset, including their retirement portfolios and the lavish suburban residence, to pay mandatory criminal restitution. The desperate woman begged for an emergency legal defense fund, sobbing loudly that her husband would perish inside a federal prison cell. A younger, deeply traumatized version of the logistics founder would have instantly yielded to this agonizing display of maternal humiliation. The biological imperative to rescue a weeping parent is incredibly powerful. However, the extensive healing process over the past 3 months had fundamentally rewired her neural pathways. She gazed down at the pathetic creature groveling on the floor and felt absolutely zero obligation. She gently but firmly extracted her fabric from the desperate grasp. The entrepreneur utilized a vocal tone colder than the approaching winter frost. She informed the hysterical matriarch that the judicial system was simply balancing the ledger they had spent decades manipulating. She advised the weeping woman to seek public legal aid and explicitly warned that any further stalking attempts would result in an immediate judicial restraining order. Without offering a single dollar or an ounce of sympathy, the victorious daughter stepped around the sobbing figure, collected her hot beverages, and exited the establishment forever. Returning to the historical inn, the executive relayed the startling encounter to her partner. Rather than triggering anxiety, the definitive rejection provided profound, unshakable closure. The final, desperate monster had been completely neutralized. That evening, they secured exclusive reservations at a highly coveted farm-to-table culinary establishment located inside a renovated agricultural barn. The dining room glowed warmly under the soft illumination of suspended vintage lanterns. They consumed a spectacular meal featuring locally sourced ingredients, raising crystal wine glasses to commemorate their shared resilience. The atmosphere was completely devoid of artificial drama, passive-aggressive manipulation, or hidden financial agendas. This peaceful dinner represented the ultimate, undeniable victory over a horrific past. As the decadent dessert course arrived, a remarkable final twist manifested. Ben reached inside his tailored suit jacket and extracted a thick manila envelope. He slid the mysterious package across the white linen tablecloth, his eyes dancing with a deeply mischievous intelligence. He explained that navigating the complex American real estate market often required creative corporate structuring. When the federal government seized the fraudulent assets belonging to the disgraced parents, their heavily leveraged suburban property was immediately auctioned off at a massive discount to satisfy the outstanding banking liens. Ben revealed he had utilized a discreet holding company to legally purchase the childhood home on her behalf for absolute pennies on the dollar. The logistics titan opened the envelope, staring in absolute astonishment at the certified property deed, displaying her own corporate entity as the sole owner. She now legally possessed the exact same luxury house the patriarch had falsely claimed was facing foreclosure 3 years prior, the very lie that initiated the entire tragic conflict. Ben leaned forward, smiling gently, asking what she intended to do with the cursed architecture. A brilliant, ruthlessly pragmatic realization flooded her brilliant mind. Zenith Freight desperately required an expanded suburban staging area to park commercial transport vehicles overnight. The affluent, highly restricted neighborhood zoning laws could be easily challenged and overturned using her immense new capital resources. The ultimate conclusion to this generational trauma was not forgiveness. The perfect resolution, perfectly aligned with the ruthless logic of American society. She looked directly at her trusted partner, a triumphant smile illuminating her face, and calmly announced her plan to bulldoze the sprawling mansion into the dirt, paving over the toxic ruins to construct a magnificent, highly profitable, concrete parking lot. The crisp November morning carried a bitter chill that perfectly suited the impending mechanical symphony. 3 massive yellow excavators idled loudly at the end of the pristine suburban cul-de-sac. Their heavy diesel engines rumbled with a deep, percussive vibration that rattled the expensive window panes of the neighboring estates. For over 2 decades, this exclusive street had remained a quiet, heavily guarded sanctuary for the regional elite. Today, however, the designated zoning regulations had been utterly obliterated by the relentless, well-funded legal department of Zenith Freight Logistics. Claudia stood on the frost-covered sidewalk, clutching a steaming paper cup of black coffee, observing the heavy machinery preparing to erase her traumatic history from the earth. The local homeowners association president, a perpetually red-faced man named Richard, marched aggressively down the pavement wearing a luxurious cashmere overcoat over his silk pajamas. He waved a thick binder of neighborhood bylaws, shouting wildly over the deafening engine noise about historical preservation and property values. He threatened immediate civil injunctions, promising to drag her shipping enterprise through decades of expensive municipal litigation. Claudia did not even bother to turn her head toward his frantic approach. She simply signaled toward a sleek black vehicle parked nearby. Her lead corporate attorney stepped out, handing the furious neighbor a perfectly bound stack of federal court orders, municipal rezoning approvals, and commercial eminent domain overrides. The lawyer calmly informed Richard that any attempt to obstruct the heavy machinery would result in immediate federal prosecution for interfering with authorized interstate commerce infrastructure. The wealthy neighbor stared at the documents, his aggressive bluster instantly deflating into terrified silence as he retreated to the safety of his manicured lawn. The untouchable suburban fortress had officially been breached. With a subtle nod from the chief executive officer, the lead foreman signaled his operators. The largest excavator lurched forward, its massive steel treads grinding the pristine driveway into pulverized gravel. The hydraulic arm extended upward, positioning a heavy iron clod directly above the lavishly renovated kitchen. This was the exact room where Elena had hosted her endless, pretentious dinner parties, feeding her insatiable ego while secretly draining her oldest child's savings accounts. The metal jaws snapped shut effortlessly, tearing through the imported roof tiles and plunging deep into the structure. With a violent, twisting motion, the machine ripped the entire exterior wall away. The custom Italian marble countertops, purchased entirely with stolen emergency funds, shattered into thousands of worthless, dusty fragments upon the frozen grass. Claudia watched the spectacular destruction without shedding a single tear. There was no profound sadness, no lingering nostalgic attachment, and absolutely no regret. She observed the plaster crumbling and the wooden beams splintering with the cold, pragmatic calculation of an auditor balancing a final spreadsheet. The physical house was merely a hollow monument to generational manipulation. Watching the ceiling collapse into the living room where Hector had orchestrated his tearful, fraudulent performance regarding the fake foreclosure felt incredibly purifying. Every single crashing impact of the wrecking ball systematically demolished the invisible psychological chains that had bound her for 30 years. Within 3 highly efficient hours, the majestic, intimidating suburban estate was reduced to a flat, unremarkable pile of industrial debris. The ledger was finally physically cleared. Following the successful demolition, the logistics titan and her trusted accountant turned their attention toward their rapidly expanding commercial empire. The following Tuesday, they initiated an unannounced executive inspection of their newly acquired agricultural subsidiary. The rural dispatch center sat surrounded by endless miles of dormant, harvested soybean fields. The facility itself was a stark, unforgiving environment, consisting of cinder block walls, flickering fluorescent lighting, and stained linoleum floors. The air smelled permanently of diesel exhaust and synthetic fertilizer. It was a rugged, unapologetic epicenter of blue-collar labor, representing the exact demographic the former golden child had historically treated with absolute mocking disdain. Entering the bustling operations floor, Claudia navigated through a maze of battered metal desks and ringing telephone banks. She located her target, sitting in a dark, isolated corner cubicle. Isabella wore a cheap plastic headset over her unwashed hair. The former glamorous socialite looked entirely broken. Her designer wardrobe had been replaced by a mandatory, ill-fitting polyester company uniform bearing the Zenith Freight logo across the left breast pocket. She was currently being berated through the telephone receiver by an incredibly angry truck driver whose cargo had been delayed by a winter storm. Isabella frantically typed routing coordinates into an outdated computer terminal, her perfectly manicured fingernails replaced by chipped, bitten cuticles. When the younger sibling finally disconnected the hostile call, she looked up and noticed the supreme owner of the company standing quietly beside her desk. A sudden, desperate flicker of misplaced hope ignited within Isabella's exhausted eyes. She immediately attempted to leverage their shared genetics, instinctively falling back upon her lifelong manipulative conditioning. She whispered frantically, begging her older relative for a transfer to the corporate headquarters in Chicago. She complained bitterly about the grueling hours, the lack of respect from the rural drivers, and the meager hourly compensation. She tried to manufacture a tear, claiming that blood should mean something, praying the wealthy executive would finally rescue her from this working-class nightmare. Claudia looked down at the miserable employee, her expression remaining perfectly blank, devoid of any sisterly warmth or lingering animosity. She did not raise her voice, nor did she issue a cruel, vindictive insult. She simply responded with the sterile, impenetrable language of modern corporate human resources. The chief executive officer calmly stated that all internal promotions required a minimum of 24 months of continuous exemplary service in the current role. She noted that the dispatcher's recent performance metrics regarding route efficiency were severely lacking and strongly advised her to focus entirely upon improving her daily call times rather than seeking unearned advancement. The absolute emotional detachment proved vastly more devastating than any screamed insult. Isabella stared back in horrified silence, finally understanding that she was no longer a cherished princess. She was merely employee number 7,412. entirely subject to the ruthless, unsentimental machinery of American corporate efficiency. The final definitive chapter of the saga arrived via a certified legal courier 3 weeks later. Ben walked into the executive suite, placing a bound court transcript upon the mahogany desk. The federal justice system had officially concluded the criminal proceedings against the disgraced patriarch. Hector had attempted to utilize his booming voice and arrogant posturing inside the courtroom, desperately trying to intimidate the presiding judge, just as he had bullied municipal clerks for decades. The strategy failed catastrophically. The federal magistrate remains completely unimpressed by the fallen developer's bluster, explicitly citing the profound betrayal of his own offspring as a severely aggravating factor in the sentencing phase. The patriarch received a mandatory, unappealable sentence of 120 months inside a medium-security federal penitentiary, accompanied by a staggering financial restitution order that guaranteed he would die completely bankrupt. Without her husband's stolen capital or intimidating presence to shield her, Elena plummeted directly to the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. The court documents indicated the formerly proud matriarch was currently residing in a cramped government-subsidized apartment complex located in a deeply undesirable neighborhood. She secured employment as a part-time cashier at a discount retail pharmacy, spending her twilight years scanning barcode labels for the exact same working-class citizens she had spent her entire privileged life actively despising. The country club associates who once attended her lavish dinner parties had completely erased her existence from their collective memory, treating her downfall like a highly contagious disease they desperately needed to avoid. 6 months after the yellow excavators arrived at the suburban cul-de-sac, the seasonal frost finally yielded to the gentle warmth of the approaching spring. Claudia drove her sedan back to the site of her former childhood torment. The sprawling, toxic mansion was entirely gone, replaced by a massive, flawlessly leveled expanse of dark, freshly poured asphalt. The scent of hot tar and painted safety lines filled the morning air. A heavy steel security fence surrounded the perimeter, guarding a magnificent, highly profitable overnight parking facility designed specifically to accommodate the massive interstate shipping trucks belonging to Zenith Freight Logistics. She stood near the automated entrance gate, alongside Ben, watching a dozen massive 18-wheelers slowly roll into the designated parking bays. The heavy engines purred with immense productive power. The architecture of her previous suffering had been completely physically erased and successfully replaced by a concrete monument to her own spectacular independence. She had survived the vicious, predatory nature of her lineage, outsmarted their manipulative traps, and utilized the unforgiving laws of American commerce to construct an impenetrable fortress of wealth and peace. The ledgers were perfectly balanced. The toxic family dynasty was permanently buried beneath 3 feet of industrial concrete. The logistics visionary smiled softly, turned her back on the parking lot, and walked confidently forward into a brilliant, unwritten future, completely and finally free. We frequently stand before the physical structures of our childhood and mistakenly identify them as the permanent foundation of our character. Looking at the smooth, freshly poured asphalt resting heavily over the obliterated remains of that grand suburban mansion, a profound realization emerges regarding the actual architecture of kinship. In modern American society, we are heavily conditioned to revere the traditional household above almost everything else. We celebrate the polished aesthetic of material success, prioritizing manicured lawns, lavish holiday gatherings, and flawless photographs broadcasted relentlessly across digital networks. Yet the devastating saga we just witnessed strips away that glossy veneer, exposing a terrifying vulnerability embedded deep within our cultural pursuit of prosperity. When guardians prioritize external validation over internal integrity, they do not build a safe sanctuary for their offspring. They construct a beautifully decorated, highly pressurized prison. The core lesson vibrating through the wreckage of this specific lineage is not merely about financial extortion or corporate revenge. It is a stark, cautionary tale regarding the catastrophic absence of emotional awareness, honesty, and fundamental fairness when raising human beings. Consider the wildly divergent paths forced upon the two siblings in our story. Raising children within a competitive capitalist framework demands a delicate, intentional balance between providing physical comfort and instilling psychological resilience. When caretakers fail to strike this equilibrium, the resulting developmental damage is absolute. The younger sibling was groomed exclusively for the spotlight, shielded entirely from consequence, and continuously rewarded for superficial compliance. We often view the golden child archetype as the fortunate one, the lucky recipient of boundless parental affection. However, providing limitless luxury while demanding zero personal accountability is perhaps the most insidious form of emotional neglect. It deprives a developing mind of the necessary friction required to build genuine self-worth and moral fortitude. By treating their youngest daughter as a prestigious trophy designed exclusively to secure a wealthy marital alliance, the parents fundamentally destroyed her capacity to survive independently. They handed her a brilliantly sparkling diamond, but completely forgot to give her a spine. She was left entirely bankrupt, not just economically, but spiritually, forced to navigate a ruthless, demanding reality she was completely unequipped to handle. Conversely, the eldest daughter experienced a vastly different, equally destructive brand of parental failure. She was burdened with extreme, unearned responsibility, transformed into a reliable financial utility rather than a cherished individual. Within many traditional communities, filial piety is demanded without question. We are taught from a very young age that honoring our caretakers implies an endless reservoir of sacrifice and silent endurance. But when that sacred devotion is weaponized, when a child's intrinsic value is measured exclusively by their capacity to subsidize their guardian's fragile egos, the household ceases to be a haven of support. It devolves into a parasitic enterprise. Honesty and fairness are the absolute bedrock of any healthy developmental environment. Without transparent communication and mutual respect, trust completely disintegrates. The matriarch and patriarch orchestrated elaborate fictions, leveraging manufactured crises to extract wealth, essentially teaching their offspring that love is nothing more than a highly manipulative transaction. They bankrupt their own legacy simply to maintain a fleeting, fraudulent social status among peers who ultimately abandon them at the very first sign of genuine distress. Authentic long-term guidance requires caretakers to look far beyond their immediate desires and focus intently upon the enduring character of their progeny. True maternal and paternal responsibility involves demonstrating vulnerability, admitting personal faults, and establishing firm, loving boundaries. It means teaching young minds that their worth is absolutely not tethered to their aesthetic appeal, their romantic conquests, or their monetary output. A truly successful American family is not defined by the square footage of their real estate, the zip code of their residence, or the brand name stitched into their garments. It is defined solely by the profound safety its members feel when the front doors are locked and the judgmental outside world fades away. When you strip a person of their dignity to fund your own vanity, you are not functioning as a parent. You are operating as a predator disguised in familiar clothing. The ultimate reckoning always arrives, and the justice delivered by a neglected soul discovering its own immense power is frequently swift, absolute, and breathtakingly severe. This brings us to a highly controversial yet deeply necessary philosophical truth regarding our societal obligations. We are endlessly bombarded with the sentimental proverb that blood is thicker than water, heavily implying that biological connections mandate permanent endurance. Conventional wisdom suggests that abandoning your kin is the ultimate moral failure, a selfish act of unforgivable betrayal that violates the natural order. However, observing the ashes of this ruined dynasty reveals a radically different reality. Sometimes, the most profoundly ethical decision a person can possibly make is to walk completely away. Severing ties with a toxic lineage is not a failure of love. It is the ultimate, magnificent triumph of self-preservation. A healthy, functioning society is not maintained by forcing victims to endlessly tolerate their abusers behind closed suburban doors. True societal health depends entirely upon individuals brave enough to recognize when a foundation is irreversibly corrupted, possessing the remarkable courage to swing the heavy wrecking ball themselves. We must absolutely stop romanticizing endurance in the face of domestic exploitation. The highest form of loyalty you possess is the unshakable obligation to protect your own fundamental peace. If you found value in exploring these complex, often hidden dynamics of human relationships and the incredible strength required to reclaim your own narrative, please consider subscribing and following Zara Told Stories. We continually strive to illuminate the intricate, messy, and triumphant realities of the human experience, providing thoughtful narratives that challenge our deeply held assumptions and spark meaningful conversations. As you navigate your own journey, constructing the architecture of your personal legacy, remember the smooth, heavy concrete resting silently over the ghosts of that shattered mansion. True heritage is never what you passively inherit through your genetics. It is the impregnable fortress you actively build alongside the chosen individuals who respect your boundaries, celebrate your independence, and fiercely protect your spirit. Look closely at the people sitting around your current dining table. Are they nourishing your soul, or are they quietly calculating your price tag? The answer to that singular question will completely dictate the entire trajectory of your remaining life.